Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Milsurp World podcast. I am hosting today. I am Danny, and with us here we have Aaron, Jared, and a special guest, Chris. If you want to say hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hey, good evening, everyone.
So Chris is he's well known in our sort of German rifle collector groups. I would say that Chris is probably like the premier, like one of the most premier Gewehr 98 collector experts in the U.S. You have an impression collection. I've seen some of the rifles that you post on the groups on Facebook and stuff, and I've never probably been as jealous of certain rifles as I have of stuff that Chris has posted online. So that's we're happy to have Chris on today as sort of our expert guest for the topic of German rifles, German infantry rifles, 1871 to 1945. So what we're going to do here is what we do normally, Chris. We'll just ask you the two questions, which is, how did you get into military surplus, and what was your first military surplus firearm?
Oh, wow. So I think I joined joined the community really because I had a love of history, and I had one of my good friends who's more of a U.S. collector had dragged me to a gun show, maybe 15 or so years ago, and I was instantly hooked. The first Milsurp that I bought was like a lot of German collectors starting out, was a Russian capture K98K. It was I think a CE42, if I'm not mistaken. JP Sauer, 1942. Pretty unremarkable. I still have it in one of my closets. I think I ended up building a sniper repro out of it, but I still have it just for sentimental reasons.
Yeah, the Russian captures, I think, are like the real gateway drug into German rifles.
Yeah.
That was
especially when they were cheap.
Yeah. 10, 15 years ago. Yeah, they were. Yeah, you could get them under 500 pretty easily. They were a good entry level, good quality gun. They fired and handled and everything. They're safe. And that was my first German Mauser. It was my second Milsurp ever. Was a K90, a Russian capture K98K. So yeah, that's a really good entry level one. I've said often that like that's how I got into it. My love of history, and then reading World War II history, and then realizing that these like relics from this war are available. Like anybody can buy them. Like you can buy like, whoa, the guns they used in that war, I could own and actually hold the same thing. That that tangible aspect of history, I think, is a really big part of this, and that's really cool, man. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess if you want to get into the topic today, 1871, I see Aaron's side profile.
All right, I'm reading about the rifles we're looking at.
Oh, okay.
I'm watching the hockey game, so everybody knows I'm here, but I'm watching the hockey game. So know that. You have my attention, just not
most
my
of this stuff is already new, but a lot of this, I don't really know much about the pre-1871.
Yeah. What I imagine when I think of like a Germany before 1871 is just a ton of little countries, just like a speckling of countries. We talked a little bit about that before we started recording, but
the Four Kingdoms.
Yeah.
Well, there were four kingdoms and a whole bunch of other
like
duchies
little
and principalities and all that. So
yeah, quite the smattering. And really, I think the pivotal moment for the unification of Germany was the Franco-Prussian War. So the defeat of the French. So the well-established French Empire as a unified country, having that sort of advantage. And then you have these upstart Germans, just a ragtag collection of confederated states, with different guns and everything, and able to defeat the French. Quite interesting. Yeah.
The Prussians were really kind of the premier military power on the continent at the time, though the French army certainly had the reputation. They had been, unified a long time. You still kind of had the specter of Napoleon and all those victories kind of over the French. So there was this air that, hey, the French are really one of the stronger countries, and really in a streak of brilliance with Bismarck, he was able to get France to declare war on Germany, so they look like the aggressor. I mean, it really was like, you think like Star Wars style, like Emperor Palpatine. The Jedi are taking over. That pretty much what Bismarck was able to do with the French, and really baited them into a war that the French just weren't prepared to win. They were embarrassed at the Battle of Sedan, and the emperor was captured, the French emperor.
Yeah. I don't think it could get any worse than that.
Yeah, you get when your king or emperor or ruler gets captured, that's pretty bad. That'd be like FDR getting captured during World War II or something.
Yeah.
Things don't go well after that.
Only if.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people realize that was the first time that German troops like marched under the Arc de Triomphe, because there's tons of pictures of German troops marching, in 1940 through underneath the Arc de Triomphe. But yeah, 1871, I think that was the first time I can think of German troops marching through Paris.
Yeah. And the thing about pre-unification, as I like to call it, the Prussians, they had the Dreise. I mean, it was a nice piece of engineering in the 1840s, 1850s, but it was starting to show its age by the time of the Franco-Prussian War. The chassepot was a superior firearm by any measure, and what happened was, on paper, the French had better weapons. They had their reputation. But the Prussians just outmaneuvered them in every way. They had superior use of railroad. Their troops were much better trained, much better led. They had the French on their heels pretty much from the beginning. It just didn't end well. And from there, after the unification, after the Kaiser was crowned in Versailles, kind of a additional slap in the face to the French, the Germans went about this concept of unification. And, people look at Germany as sort of a monolithic country from that point on, but it really wasn't. You had all these states from the four kingdoms: Prussia, Saxony, Bavaria, and Württemberg were the four major ones. But filtering down from there, you had grand duchies, principalities, and then kind of the smallest denominator were some of the free and Hanseatic cities. You had Lubeck, Bremen, and Hamburg, and they were all independent in some measure. In many cases, they had their own monarch. They had maybe a duke or a prince that ruled that state, and really was subservient to the Kaiser, maybe militarily. But in the case of the four kingdoms, they were allowed to keep their own armies. And the Württemberg army was actually folded into the Prussian army as the 13th Army Corps. But the Bavarians and Saxons had their own separate and distinct military that was only beholden to the Kaiser in a time of war, which is what happened in World War I, obviously.
Yeah. One of the more interesting things that I learned was, you do think of Germany, this big unified country, but the fact that just a few years before the Franco-Prussian War, the Bavarians were fighting the Prussians, and
they didn't like each other either. The Bavarians to this day, there's still a minority of Bavarians that wouldn't mind seceding from modern Germany.
Yeah, I guess I don't know what they would join, Austria or something. I wonder what they would.
Probably be an independent country, but I mean, it's not a majority anymore by any stretch. But there was a union with Austria discussed after World War I between Bavaria and Austria. It never really went anywhere, but they just hated the Prussians so much they really kind of wanted to break off at one point.
Oh yeah. I heard that. What was it? Most countries have armies. Prussia was an army with a country, I think is what I've heard about that.
Yeah, stemming
very
back, and that goes back to the
Frederick.
Frederick the Great era. He was kind of the warrior king. His father had actually was the one that built the army, but Frederick used it, and he was able to, Hohenfreiburg was a major victory for the Prussians, and really by tactics, luck. You talk about. I don't know if you've heard the stories about Frederick the Great with the potato, but he people will still put potatoes on his
Oh, yeah.
grave because he was one of the first rulers to realize, hey, the potato is great for
A hedge
feeding
against
troops.
the famine.
Yeah,
War induced famine. Hmm.
easy to grow, easy to store, keeps for a long time.
Very
Um,
nutritious. Yeah.
high calories. Maybe not the best from a nutritional standpoint, but it certainly had calories in it, which an army marches on its stomach.
Yeah. That was interesting. I think they said during the reign of Frederick, the population of Prussia decreased. I guess from so much conflict. So I think that's sort of like a bloody origin for a country to kind of be forged out of this kingdom at the time, and then sort of that militarism, I think, just sort of kind of carried on into the German unification, the Prussian militarism, and also something a lot of people kind of don't think much of is the Prussianization that happened to other countries, and how they got Prussians to come over and teach them militarism. And I think the kind of the modern day Chilean military is kind of looked at as being the kind of the last holdout. Maybe the Swedish a little bit. But you could see the guys marching with very Stahlhelm shaped helmets and goose stepping, like the Chileans still military goose steps in their parades, like to this day, because it's that holdover, that Prussianization, as they say.
Yeah. We even in the U.S. in the late 1800s, we had the Prussian blue uniforms. I'm sure you'll see them at militaria shows. You can see the Pickelhaube, American Pickelhaube they had for the Marines and some of the Army. So it was very much. I mean, they were seen as really the premier military power worldwide, and I mean, we got our idea of having a general staff from them. So it really a lot of innovations came out of Prussia.
Yeah.
The American army was trained by a Prussian.
Von Steuben.
Yeah, von Steuben. And you'd think I would at Valley Forge, because he said he was some great guy and he was a captain. And I love there's some documentary where you listen to where they say this, and I love the guy's voice. It's like he actually wasn't he was only just a captain. Washington didn't care.
No.
Like, that is the line that they give, and I love it. Like, he did not care.
And von Steuben, I mean, the reason he went to the U.S. is because really no other army wanted him. He was kind of an outcast. He had some allegations made about him, and I think he was going to the U.S. because he knew they'd probably take him because they were so desperate at that point. But hey, it worked out.
Prussian army.
Yep.
American army was a Prussian army, basically. It was trained in that way.
Wasn't it like when Washington crossed the Delaware? Wasn't that Hessian troops that he fought?
In Trenton.
So it was ethnic Germans that the Americans were fighting as well.
That was in Trenton. When they went into Trenton, that was against the Hessian mercenaries, which is Middle Germany, Hesse.
Yeah, they were from all over Germany. They kind of got the broad name Hessians because of the German principality of Hesse. But really, I mean, they could have been one of my ancestors was a Hessian mercenary, and he was from Ansbach in Bavaria. So they came from all over Germany. They just kind of got that broad name of Hessians, sort of almost like a stereotype or whatever. Oh yeah, they're all Hessians, whatever.
Yeah. That doesn't happen in war at all. Just broad generalizations of the enemy.
Yeah, never.
Yeah. So the sort of ununified Germans, kind of led by the Prussians, defeating the French Franco-Prussian War. And then coming out of that, my understanding is sort of this desire of a unifying rifle, sort of a unifying caliber, because a lot of the various kingdoms are just sort of using whatever they thought was the best at the time, which sort of just depended on what they happened to buy. It seems like, or like the time of adoption.
Yeah, and they had really the unification of Germany came in stages. So you had the North German Confederation was sort of the precursor to the German Empire. Prussia was able to unify the North, but you had the Catholic South that was really that they weren't brought into the fold until later, until after the Franco-Prussian War was the catalyst that pulled them in. But coming into that war, you had the Prussians had the Dreyse series. You had the Bavarians who had a rather they had the muskets. They also had a rather poor breech loader called the Podvils Lindner, which was also called the coffee grinder. It was a converted Podvils musket turned into a breech loader, and it had a really lousy bolt in the back that you'd pull open. You'd put in your paper cartridge. It's really just a terrible rifle by any measure, but it was what the Bavarians had. And then very close to the war, they had maybe armed maybe a regiment, maybe two regiments with a new rifle, which was arguably the best rifle of the war. That was the Werder. The Werder was a falling block, kind of a modified falling block rifle, single shot. But if you look at one, it has two triggers on it. And one of them is a traditional trigger. You pull it, the hammer falls, it shoots the round out of the rifle. And then there was a second trigger. You flick your finger forward, and it ejects the spent casing, so you can very quickly load it. It got the name the Lightning or the Blitz because of the ability for it to fire so quickly. But they were only used in limited numbers during the Franco-Prussian War. But when they were used, they had quite the reputation.
So they made him.
What's bigger, a battalion or a regiment?
A regiment is a regiment's bigger.
Okay, so this is saying that due to budgetary constraints, by the time of the war, they only had 4 infantry battalions outfitted with the Werder.
Yeah,
and it was primarily given to Jager units. So I'm guessing those were specialty troop units.
Yeah. Jager, German for hunter. They were more like skirmishers, sharpshooters. They had quite a. There's actually, as we talk about the other rifles that came after unification, we'll talk a little bit about how the Jager up through the 71 and kind of laughably with the 7184 in Prussia had their own model. But really, the Werder was used on a very limited scale in the
Franco-Prussian War.
Yeah, in Franco-Prussian War. Much more were made later. But as Danny had pointed out, after unification, you ended up in a position where a lot of these rifles were brought up to Prussian standard. They had the Prussians had a strong desire to make sure that everyone used the same ammunition. I mean, it makes sense, right? You want your army using the same ammunition because it makes resupply a lot easier. The order came down to modify the Werders to 11 millimeter Mauser, and this was carried out, but it was really just a terrible conversion. And the 11 millimeter Mauser was a much more powerful cartridge than the 11 millimeter Werder that it was originally chambered in. It was really hard on the action. There were a lot of problems with the conversion, and it ultimately ended in failure, where Bavaria eventually adopted the M71 Mauser.
Well, the Wikipedia is disagreeing with you. It's saying that they refused to adopt the 71 and actually didn't replace the Werder until the 88.
No, that's I disagree with Wikipedia there. They had the Werder was in full production by that point, but the 71 they were not quick to adopt because, hey, look, we have the Werder at single shot too, we like it.
Yeah,
but
they've already produced.
Are like, hey, you got to use our ammo. So, and they actually, it came in two phases. They had Werders that were converted, and then they had the new model Werders, which were very Prussianized, and they were made from the get-go with the 11 millimeter Mauser chambering. But still, it just was not a good chambering for that action. And as good as the Werder was in the original caliber, it was just a disappointment in the new ammunition.
It's very unconventional looking in terms of it. What you see is in what you would expect from this time period, because a lot of the 11 millimeter black powder rifles look very similar. At least to me, because I don't. This is out of my area of expertise, but like a lot of them look very similar. But this one looks weird. Like,
yeah,
it's got like a weird hump to it.
Yeah. You have like bolt guns, you have guns with hammers, and then you have like lever guns.
Oh, like
and then
falling
that.
blocks and
like a falling block, like a martini, and then that.
Yeah.
And then
So it is different.
This was very much on the falling block family tree, but with some pretty significant modifications.
Yeah.
But so the Werder, you'll see them out in the market. They're really, any Werder is not common by any stretch. You tend to see more of the Prussian converted ones. But if you find one in the Bavarian caliber, that's a pretty special find. I found one a few years ago, and I was pretty excited about it because so many of them would have been subjected to conversion. So this one, who knows how it escaped that, but it did, and I've seen a few others like it, but they're certainly rare.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think like the most people think of this time period as just the Germans switching over to the Mauser instead of just kind of the various countries trying what they can.
I think this is something we'll run into multiple times here, which is a case of sunk cost, which is they've already tooled this up. It's already been trialed. It's already been proven. They even use it in a war, and they're like, no, why would we change this?
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to pay to do this again.
What does change it? What changes the whole landscape? The Smokeless.
Yes,
well, we'll get to that, but
we will.
But this is still
in the black powder,
1870.
in the black powder age, it's still kind of all everyone's trying to figure out the.
And Danny's heard my hot take about 11 millimeter black powder rifles.
Oh yeah,
I'll get to it here in a bit, but you've heard it before.
I mean,
so yeah, the thing about again, we haven't even talked about Saxony or Württemberg, all these other principalities. Württemberg and Baden and I believe Hesse all had what was called the Union rifle. Because the three of them kind of got together and designed a rifle and rifled musket. Saxony.
I see it here. It's 1856 in 54 caliber. It's a mini ball.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yep. Basically a rifled musket. Saxony was in a very similar boat.
Is this just due to finance, like budgetary issues?
Yeah. The thing that you'll see a lot of with German states, especially with muskets, is they really didn't have the capability to make their own weapons. So like one of the Saxon rifled muskets I have was produced in Belgium because the Belgians had the capability to manufacture them. Saxony really, they had an arsenal in Dresden, but they had outsourced the production because it just wasn't conducive to make domestically. You obviously had the Royal Rifle Factory in Württemberg, which eventually was purchased by the Mauser brothers after the state arsenal was shut down after unification. So I have muskets, carbines, even a needle rifle that was built at Obendorf before it was Mauser. So kind of neat to see how that arsenal was repurposed later to a private company.
Yeah. I still, it's so hard to wrap my head around that these countries after unification adopted front stuffers to get by. That's just
this,
wild.
This country, after unification, adopted the Reichsrevolver. It's a single action with a safety.
Yeah. Not. I'm trying to keep out of pistols because that's a whole dealio.
Pistols and carbines too, because there are some really wacky stuff that happened with carbines after unification, including use of old chassepos that were cut down and converted to 11 millimeter. The Saxons were a little bitter because they had just spent a bunch of money making a nice breech loader cavalry carbine, and suddenly they had to figure something out that was a little more modern, had a metallic cartridge. So, but I digress. I could talk about the 1860s and 70s for hours. So I'll shut up.
Why don't we move on to the one that most people know of, at least if you're somewhat aware of German history, which is the 1871 Mauser.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is this the first time Mauser gets adopted by a country? Like this is his first design that's adopted by somebody?
It was the first major contract, because you had him tinkering around with some of those prototype designs, but this was kind of the big game changer for them as a company. The Mauser, the rifle itself, it was produced by several different makers. Germany was trying to rearm, get a more modern rifle. You had obviously a bit of a wake-up call when you saw how superior the Chassepot was to the Dreiser, and you had production begin. With the Prussian arsenals, with Mauser Obendorf, obviously had a contract as well. Mauser Obendorf's production, though, remember, they were still a pretty small company, so their production really went to Württemberg. Because that's the state that they were located in, and Mauser licensed the design to the Prussian arsenals. Obviously, the main Prussian arsenal was Spandau, right outside of Berlin. They certainly made their share of 71s. You had also some private contractors. This is one that a lot of people don't know, but National Arms and Ammunition in Birmingham, England, was actually contracted to make several, like over 100,000 M71s. They basically, the Prussians eventually they took delivery of some, but they said to others they weren't going to take delivery of because they didn't think the standards were high enough. Probably just an excuse to get out of buying all of them now that they were ramped up. You have to remember, manufacturing at the time too was not as it is today. Interchangeable parts were not fully implemented. The British were really light years ahead of the Prussians in that regard, so it makes sense they would have gone to a British company for this. The Prussians and the Brits were still pretty warm at this point. You didn't have Willy II kind of screwing that up yet, and you also had them trying to modernize now that they were this big industrial power. So basically, aside from National Arms and Ammunition, you had some were contracted from Steyr in Austria. You also had some Dreiser, the company Dreiser in Somerda, started making 71s. They're pretty rare, but they were eventually, that contract was transitioned over to the Erfurt Arsenal, which is in Thuringia in Germany. That was kind of one of the secondary arsenals, but a very large one. It made up for or was the replacement for the old Cern arsenal, which made needle rifles. If you ever see a Cern, Erfurt replaced it. And then, of course, you have Danzig. Danzig was in East Prussia. It was kind of the heartland of where the Prussians had a stranglehold on power. So naturally, Danzig was a big arsenal and produced a large number of 71s. You also have the 71 began in much later in Bavaria, but still they adopted it, and they made many M71s. In fact, the Amberg M71 is probably the most common. We don't know why, because others made as much as them or as many as them, but for whatever reason, Ambergs, you will see probably 10 Ambergs before you see a Spandau. You'll probably see 20 Ambergs before you see a Danzig, and maybe even more than that before you see an Erfurt. So very, very wide array of makers for them. But the rifle itself was a pretty simple design, right? It was when you look at it from our lens, it was a single shot. It didn't have an ejector, at least in what we think of it. You had an extractor which would pull the round out, but the soldier would have to pull the spent casing out and load it. The ejector didn't come until later. The length, obviously, at the time, rifles were pretty long. The thought was that the longer barrel meant better accuracy. The metallic cartridge was new, but it was it was pretty well received from everything I've seen. But it was ultimately sort of the kickoff of modern arms in Germany as we think of them.
It's 4.5 feet long.
Yeah, it's long.
53 inches long. It weighs almost 10 pounds. And the barrel itself is 33.6 inches long. So,
yeah. And it's still shorter than a Drysa. The
Drysa is even bigger. I've
seen 5 feet long or something. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not the longest rifle in my safe.
Yeah.
My Snyder is longer.
Yep. Some of the older ones were longer still. Muskets are a little bit longer, I think, in many cases. Again, because the thought was that the longer barrel would help accuracy.
Yeah. So moving forward from the 71 is because that's such an interesting era and what everybody was coming up with their guns. Like we said, the bolt actions.
I do have some contemporaries at the same time period. If you want to just go over them real quick.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So just real fast, we have the early Verndl rifle in Austria-Hungary.
Yep.
Roughly the same time period. It's the Verndl Holub, Holub. Holub. It's not the normal.
Kind of the little rotating.
Yeah. It's not the Verndl that people are thinking of. The Verndl by itself. This is a different one. So this is like, if we're saying the same time period of 1870s, and then the Martini Henry, also the Enfield Martini, and then the Gra, the Italian Vetterli. It's around the same time period. The Jarman,
Norwegian.
The Berdan rifle, and then in the U.S. the Springfield model 1884.
Yeah.
So, and actually the U.S. late in the game there, a little bit late in the game, getting in 1884.
Yeah, that's sort of a repeated theme.
Well, of course, the Jarman is also 1884 as well. So,
also Spanish rolling blocks.
The rolling blocks
there's
are
a
common.
Bunch of rolling blocks.
Oh yeah. Everybody and their mother adopted a rolling block.
Yeah, the rolling blocks work
because they work.
Yeah. Can't argue that for a single shot. It's not a bad design.
Such a great domestic design of the U.S. military. Doesn't really.
Of those, man, you're like, you could have those or a rolling block. You're like, well, I mean, you could have a rolling block. So in 50, 70, like something big, And,
yeah.
I've got to say, in terms of all the ones we mentioned, with maybe the exception of the Gra, but like these are starting to where you start to see like what the modern rifle shape is. Like you start to see a modern bolt action modern. Because this is obviously not modern anymore, but like you start to see what we consider to be a bolt action rifle take shape. Like the Drysa is kinda, but also like no.
If you've operated a Drysa, it operates very differently than a bolt action rifle. You have to cock the bolt. You have to, the needle, the way the needle protrudes into the cartridge is very different.
Yeah, so the 71, I think, is one of the first ones, at least for me, it has been like, okay, this is where we start to get to the modern era of like understanding what designs work and what doesn't. Because like everybody said, we talked about Smokeless there for a second, but like the metallic cartridge is also a huge leap in terms of design, in terms of what we can and what isn't possible. And the metallic cartridge really cemented the idea like, oh yeah, we can not do a breech loader, or not a breech loader, a muzzle loader, and it actually is a good idea. Like, let's keep doing this. And that's, I think, was one of the kickstarts to the idea of, oh, where all these, because it's just really weird when you go back and you look, and everybody has, like, if you look at World War I and World War II, they all have different calibers. They're all really, really different in terms of size and speeds and whatever. But at this era, they're almost all of them 11 millimeter. They're all different, slight variations, but they're all roughly the same size. So it's like everybody's got the same playing field. Yeah. We're all just kind of focusing on the mechanics of how we deliver that bullet.
Yeah, it's convergent evolution almost.
It's very weird, actually, every time I've thought about it, because there's like 30 or 40 different versions of 11 millimeter. Across the board.
Well, something that you probably don't think of as weight. So, like, as far as bullets are concerned, you got to pack them, and there's no railroads for some of this. Like, you got to carry the shit.
Yep.
So let's make something that's big and dumb and slow and hurts as small as we can. Like, there's like core, like, this is good and this is good and this is good, and it's like, oh, we'll just do this right here, like, so you could have a 75 caliber bolt action. Why? But you could, because you have to, lead's heavy.
Right. Well, you go from the mini. Well, like, muskets are typically 50 to 60, 50 to 60-ish roughly. And that's just a rough given. I don't really know much about them. So then we just they realized, oh, actually with this we can compress it, we can make it smaller, and they're starting to get on the idea of it going faster as well. They're like, we can actually, and consistency too, so we don't have to worry about, this soldier packed a little bit more in this one versus that one, and this one and that one, and so you get consistency, and you get kind of that kind of thing going on, and I just think it's very interesting, because this is the part of, I think this is a lot of history that gets looked over a lot in the U.S. because it's not a major conflict or anything that we were ever involved in. So a lot of this stuff is really just, and it's also black powder, so it tends to just be pushed aside for the more interesting things, quote unquote.
So some of the stuff too that's not considered as gas seal.
Yeah,
a gas seal.
Oh,
so like a Dryza has no gas seal. It's a cone.
Not factory. Yeah. So after observing the gas seal on the Chassepot, they actually they did what was called the Beck conversion on the Dryzas. That it added a metal plate with a kind of a washer that sort of sealed it, and it significantly enhanced the performance, but that was just borrowed time for the Dryza. So, but still neat that they thought to do that.
So they thought that having the bottleneck in the cartridge would help, assist you with gas seal. And Lugers actually have a small neck in their chamber for help for that. It's really tiny, but it's there.
Yeah.
So that's something that, like, oh yeah, we're going to 11. All right, well, let's make it a little bigger so it has a little bit of a bottleneck, so that way we get that good gas seal when the brass case or copper case expands. So
my problem,
I saw. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Danny.
It's probably like one of my favorite like parts of this era and like firearms development is the magazine development and sort of how that plays into the different actions. because there's lots of little weird designs of magazines. Like how do you store all these extra rounds on the gun and then get them into the action? So you see some like gravity fed conversions, like kind of slaps onto the side of the gun and drops in, and then kind of tubes. I think kind of become king there for a few short years. Tube magazines were kind of the
probably about 10, 15 years for sure. Yeah. Our project really sold a lot of tube magazine designs, I think, with his stuff.
Trying to think. So 68, the Swiss Vetterli, with their tube magazine, I think was like the first one that I can think of. Like that like a major adoption.
Yeah, that was sort of the direction at the time, because that Integral Box magazine, really it was later on that really took off. But at the time, tube magazines were really it. They had the Prussians in particular were, obviously they wanted to have a repeater. Mauser had experimented a little bit on different designs. There's actually a one rifle that had sort of an experimental stamped metal weird magazine that they were playing around with. There was the 7182 was sort of a prototype design that Mauser had worked on, and then you ultimately got the 7184, which was the first repeater that had been adopted by Germany. And that obviously it's a rifle that doesn't get a lot of attention or a lot of love, but if you're looking to get a mint German rifle, that's the one to get, because there's so many of them out there.
Well, and it also gets even the name even co-ops it. Like, it's a separate rifle. Like, it's not the same thing.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh, it's not a conversion. It's a new production.
Yeah. Out of the box, they didn't convert them, and they were a creature. It's interesting. So the four arsenals made them: Spandau, Erfurt, Danzig, and Amberg. But also there was a very small contract for Württemberg with Mauser. Those are pretty hard to find. They only made about 20,000 of them. But that's really it. Significantly fewer makers than the 71. I think I forgot to mention my favorite 71 maker, the Sul Consortium, Spangenberg and Sauer, CG Heinel, and VC Schilling. But they're probably the hardest ones to find on the 71 side. But back to the 7184, the cool part about it is really, if you ever take one apart, the precision in the engineering and the little small components, it almost feels like a Swiss watch when you take it apart. It's probably one of my least favorite rifles to take apart because of all the components. You have to remove the tube. You have to pull it out of the stock. It's a lot more cumbersome to take apart than the 71. And then you got to make sure you put it back together right. Like, if you don't have the tube all the way in the right way, you won't be able to get it in the stock right. But it's neat to take apart and actually look at it from the inside out.
Even just the basic field stripping is that much harder on the 7184?
I would say so. The 71 is, I could take those apart in my sleep, but the 7184 is it's just a little bit more cumbersome to take apart.
Well, another thing too is that a lot of the times, I don't know about Prussia and Germany in this era, but a lot of the countries that I know of, like France and Austria-Hungary, they didn't want the individual troops touching the rifles like that. So that idea of easy to field strip is not a thing. They weren't supposed to do that. So, like, the Berthier gets a lot of flack because it has a screw that you have to take out. But that's by design. Like, they don't want you to take it apart because you'll lose shit, and they don't want you to do that.
Yeah, you would have a regular farm boy or whoever that was doing this. That wasn't like they were a trained armorer. It's like, we're looking at it as collectors that are educated on this, and that's easy to take that apart. But you hand it to the average German soldier, hey, take apart your bolt. They're probably going to be like, huh, what?
Yeah, that's a much more modern concept of the soldier themselves being able to rudimentarily clean the weapon, but like back in the day, like you did not touch the stuff.
Yeah, you can take it apart in your well-lit room with your table. Go outside. Take it apart in your yard.
Yeah.
Like,
oh man,
in the daytime. Do it at night.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah,
do it by candlelight.
Yeah.
Load it.
Start a small fire.
Oh, it's hard enough just to load your gun in the pitch black, like an old gun like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they had a also you look at it from, you'll see these rifles that get listed on Gunbroker or whatever, and they're like, oh look, the German soldier carved his initials on the stock. No, that German soldier most certainly did not carve their initials on the stock. They had extremely strict regulations. You probably would have been beaten, thrown in the brig, and probably made to write an apology letter to that rifle if you had carved your initials into the stock.
And probably paid for it too.
Like they probably would have made you pay for the thing too. So it was it just didn't happen. So that's really just FUD lore. And usually what happens if there's initials carved in it is it was post-war, if it's like a K98K that went to another country after the war, or if it was maybe the vet brought it back. Like I've got a couple Gewehr 98s that will have, vets' names, carved into the stock, or their service number or something like that. That's a different story, but the German soldiers most certainly wouldn't have done that. There was no trench art on stocks. There was no trench art on their weaponry or equipment. That just didn't happen.
Yeah.
I want to bring this up too, just so people are aware. The one of the big innovations that Mauser makes with the 1871 is the safety. And this is the origin of the iconic Mauser safety.
Mauser flag safety.
Yep.
So this is where this was a requirement from the German government. They said you need to come up with a safety for this, and then we'll adopt it. They did, and this is the safety that most everybody knows now as the Mauser safety came from this rifle. So that's a huge achievement in terms of what everybody has recognized, because it really, according to what I'm reading here, did not change. The fundamental design was basically the same as it was when they started with the 70.
Yeah. To be used for 70 years, and that lineage, that's kind of incredible for a safety mechanism.
The safety was certainly the big contribution from the 71, and then later on the 5-round box magazine was the big contributor from the Model 98. But those two things, it was kind of like the kidney grill on the BMW. It just stayed as part of the design from then on.
Yeah.
So do you want to go into the? We're not going to need to necessarily go into huge detail, but there is the Jager M71s, and then there's also it looks like there was an attempt to do a carbine.
Yes,
but they never really fully adopted it too much. They did adopt it, but it was slow to adopt.
Yeah, it was slow to adopt. So I'll speak to the Jager rifle quickly. There was a sort of a warrior ethos with the Jaegers, and especially the Prussian Jaegers, and those that sort of reported through the army, the Prussian army. They always had a history of having their own rifle. You go back and look. They had Jaeger rifles, which were basically really early rifled muskets that date back even to the Revolutionary War era. They used a patched bullet. They had superior accuracy. They were given to sharpshooters. But that tradition continued. And when the 71 came out, there were Dreisas that were Jaeger models. When the 71 came out, the Jaegers got a slightly shorter version that had a more ornate iron trigger guard with a finger grasping kind of hook there, and slightly shorter, few other little minor modifications to it, and it most importantly had a rear sling loop that was drilled into the stock on the underside. The regular 71 had a rear sling loop that was part of the trigger guard, but this Jaeger sling loop became an important distinguishing factor in addition to the other minor changes to the rifle. If you find a Jaeger, they were made by only three of the makers. One of them was Danzig. Probably most commonly, you'll see them from Steyr. They were subcontracted from Austria, and then also Mauser made a very small number of Jaeger rifles for Württemberg. But they're much less common. I've read the statistic that fewer than 10% of 71 production rifles were Jaeger models. You can also see on the side rail, instead of JG Infantry Gewehr Model 71, it actually says B Mod 71. That's the Jaeger designation, but much rarer. I like them. They're a lot more handy. They're shorter. I like the way that your fingers kind of grasp into the trigger guard a little bit better. It's just a much more elegant piece. You can tell that these guys really took pride in having their separate model from the regular infantry units.
That sounds a little bit like the origins of the short rifle, maybe.
Yeah. I think that played into it. Obviously, these guys were skirmishers. They were more light infantry, more skilled sharpshooters. They wanted something maybe a little bit more compact. If you look at the trigger guards on some of these Jaeger rifles from Napoleonic times, or some of the percussion muskets, they have a distinct look to them. And this really carried forward. The funny thing, though, before I get into the carbine, when you look at the 7184, when that rifle came out, the Jaegers were kind of mad that they didn't have a separate model, because they just came up with a one-size-fits-all approach for that. So they really stomped their feet and pouted. So the Prussian Jaeger units were issued a slightly modified 7184, and literally the only change was they added an extra sling loop drilled into the stock that gave them that separate, distinct appearance. So every once in a while, you'll see a Jaeger 7184. They're not as well known because it's really just such a small minor difference, but they're typically Spandaus. I think those are the only ones that I've seen. And the ones that I've seen typically went to more prestigious Jaeger units, like the Guard Jaeger Battalion. They were kind of an elite unit, and some of the other kind of higher echelon Prussian Jaegers, probably the ones with the biggest egos and the ones that were stomping their feet the most about having a separate model.
Yeah.
So
I feel like it's those early German ones, like there seems to be a lot of little weird variants like that I wasn't aware of at first, because just sort of dipping your toe into like German black powder rifles, it's just like there's a 7184, and it's like, yeah, no, then there's lots of little variations of that.
Yeah.
Of that 70.
Well, this seems to be like the holdover from them being all independent is like, oh no, we want this to be slightly different and this to be slightly different. So like the base thing's the same, but so slightly different. So everybody feels okay.
Yeah.
I would
Kind of
say
a little bit of pandering to the whiny elite guard.
So what about the carbiner?
Yeah. So the carbine was they kind of rushed right to the rifle with regard to development, and they knew, okay, we're using Dryza carbines, which if you've ever seen that, it kind of looks like it's a dwarven musket or something from Warhammer. It's tiny. It's got a terrible recoil. They really weren't that effective of a weapon in that period of time now. So they knew, hey, we need a stopgap. We need something so that if we go to war again, our troops have something modern. So they went through in Prussia, a pretty comprehensive program, and converted. They brought home a couple 100,000 chassepos from the Franco-Prussian War. They cut them down into carbines, converted them to 11 millimeter Mauser, and used them as a stopgap while they developed a 71 carbine. The 71 carbine was eventually completed. It was adopted, and it served well until the 88 carbine was implemented later on. But the 71 carbines were produced. Spandau was one of them. You also had Mauser made a small number for Obendorf. Those are among the rarest carbines you can find. Steyr made a ton of them. You also had the Sul Consortium. Sauer, Schilling, and Heinel made some as well, particularly for Bavaria. I think actually all the ones they made were for Bavaria. The Bavarians also made some out of spare parts that were left over from Steyr that might have an Amberg stamped on them, but really they're not an Amberg carbine. But really, these carbines, they're significantly smaller than the rifle. You guys have probably seen them. They have a bent bolt. They have kind of a little nose cap with the sight ears on it that you will see on the 88 carbines as well. And they're nice. They're handy. They've got a little smaller size sight. I like the 71 carbines. They're one of my favorite carbine models. I have several of them, and they're fun to shoot, fun to handle. They're very very wieldy compared to the long rifle. They were a little late to the game though compared to the rifle.
Yeah. So I think that moves us right into the sort of smokeless revolution.
Yeah.
Which again, it's like there's kind of all these things.
Oh shit moment.
Yeah, you kind of in sort of unified Germany's early history, you have the rush to cartridges, and then you have sort of the magazines trying to how do we get these and as many of them in the gun as possible in the best way. And then right after they kind of figure out a magazine, then you have the French 8mm smokeless cartridge, and then you have a whole another kind of round of oh shit, what do we do? And I love the sort of drama behind the German commission with as far as like Paul Mauser and how that just really inspired him to come back with other designs. But if we could talk a little bit about,
just scored a goal. Because Jared's flipping his shit out over there.
No, the Ottawa scored a goal and they overturned it because the guy was offsides.
Oh,
okay. Dang! Hate it when that happens.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, right? It's the only sport that matters. All the other ones are stupid.
I forget you're basically Canadian up there.
Yeah, I'm
really. Oh, really?
Hockey. To all my hockey friends, it's a way of life.
Yeah, it is.
So, but I mean, really, the Germans, they had that, as you said, sort of the oh shit moment when the French had smokeless powder. They were doing all kinds of crazy things with gun cotton, with other experimental propellants. But ultimately, they say again.
I thought I was on mute. I love that they use gun cotton.
Yeah,
I just think it's funny.
They're trying to use it, pretty much come up with smokeless powder in any way they could.
What's about a small amount of dynamite?
Yeah, let's put this explosive shit in a gun and see if it makes a poof. And if it poofs, it'll work.
Yeah, it'll work. If not, next we'll try the next guy.
Yeah.
With the Paul Mauser really was kind of got a little upset about for the first time. You go back to when the Germans were adopting a revolver, and he really wanted them to adopt his revolver. He was lobbying hard. He was trying. The zigzag is the one I'm referring to, and ultimately the Prussians went with the M79 Reich revolver instead. Yeah, it's I call it. Everyone calls it the Reich revolver. It was really just the Model 79 revolver. Reich revolver is really just a collector term, but he was really just disappointed that they didn't use his design. He got some of the contracts to produce the M79 and later the 83. That was kind of the recompense for them not going with his design, but I think he was pretty bitterly disappointed. With regard to the 88, though, really, Mauser at the time, they were elbow deep in other contracts, and really they well, I'm sure if the Prussians had taken one of their designs, they would have been fine. But the Ottoman contract was, I think, the single biggest contract they had at that point, and they were certainly they ended up staying busy. But
yeah, that's what Morrow mentioned when he was on. When
Yeah.
he was talking about Mauser and history, is that the Ottoman contract was a huge deal for them, and it was like their main focus. So I know there's a lot of drama in the fact that, and it seems weird because most people associate Mauser with Germany, and that they wouldn't use Mauser for this, but obviously the political aspect of it. But then the fact that he was like very focused on the production for the Ottomans, and then like right after you have like the Belgians, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And then soon after you get the Argentinians, you get the Spanish. So like Mauser wasn't hurting for money.
Yeah. Well, and really, he had to lever the company pretty significantly to deliver some of these large contracts.
Yeah, to sort of give away his company.
That's how he sort of got sort of the outside investors that ended up taking control.
He had a hostile takeover of his own company because he sort of, leveraged it in the way that he did.
He didn't have the business savvy for that, like as far as how to handle that.
He just got a loan, and Lova bought the loan and just did a hostile takeover based on that from the bank. But the bank that he got the loan from, if they would have just been a bank and let him, make payments or whatever and not taken over his company. So I feel like they kind of did him dirty a little bit with that. But what's your take on that?
Well, and later, really where it got nasty with the 88 was, look, you had this commission that designed it, and then ultimately Lova was the lead firm for the production of it. It was obviously licensed, to other or contracted to other entities. You had Steyr made some, mainly to appease them for ripping off Mannlicher's design on the M block clip. But then also you had the arsenals, which produced some. You had carbines that were produced in Seoul. But with the first, obviously going to smokeless was a game changer. And when you do a big technological leap like that, there's going to be problems. So in some of the early 88s, there were problems with the barrels. I've read a couple different conflicting views on it, but the thought was maybe it was something to do with the steel or the rifling. But in any case, there were barrels that were wearing out too fast and some that were catastrophically failing. And when that came out, there was, I think his name was Alvard, his last name. He was a member of the Reichstag, and he was, raging anti-Semite, and obviously Ludwig Lova was a Jew. So you started to get this big, crazy conspiracy theory about, okay, this Jewish guy did us dirty. He sold out Germany so that he could make money. And you had this pamphlet that hit the market.
Yeah.
The pamphlet was called Judenflinte, Jew rifle, basically. And it railed about how Lova was corrupt, the German military sold us out, they're making crappy weapons, and they took it even a step further. Alvart was trying to say in his pamphlet that this was intentional by the Jews to weaken Germany, give them a bad rifle that would fail in battle so that their enemies could defeat them, and then Germany falls, and that's what the Zionists wanted or whatever. Ultimately, he ended up getting thrown in jail, I think, Alvart for libel, for writing this thing. It's actually the pamphlet itself. It's talked about extensively in Dr. Stors's book, but the pamphlet, it really cast a cloud over the production of the 88, and the idea that it was also not designed by Mauser, It was, you took a clip loading system that was taken from an Austrian design. There was never really a lot of love for the 88, and I think that's a shame, because once they figured out the steel problems, you'll see some of them that are stamped NM for new material, basically in German. They worked out the problems. They got the rifling right on the barrels, and it really is. If you've ever shot an 88, they're nice rifles. They perform well compared to contemporary rifles, but they have this sort of, they're maybe not the most attractive rifle. And then you had all the hullabaloo about them being bad rifles, and then of course you got all the FUD lore about them, which, depending on how much time you guys have, we can talk about the FUD lore about the 88s, because there is a lot of it.
My personal favorite
for
is
the Spitzers.
my personal favorite is the this has a Mannlicher stock and bolt. No, it doesn't. It just has a full-length stock and like a spoon bolt. No, that's a Mannlicher thing. Okay, what year's the rifle? This is a 1903. Okay, and I hand them my 1890 that has the date on it. I'm like, then what's this?
Yeah.
And there's like, it's just crickets. I'm like, yeah, read a fucking book.
Yeah. I almost mentioned when you were talking about the 71 carbine of like the Mannlicher, in quotations, stock. It's that nose cap that, so forward to the front. But the 1888, I feel like it's like the black sheep of German rifles. Not quite as overlooked as the 7184, because there was no major conflict in the short window that it was used. It did get pulled into World War I sort of as an emergency.
Significantly. And I will say, Danny, the 88, like a lot of people don't like the 88. Oh, it wasn't really used, or rear echelon units used it in World War I. But actually, it was significantly used, at least through 1916. There were probably more 88s out there than 98s in the field with frontline units. As a result, a lot of them were used up and beat the crap and all that in the trenches. So matching 88s are something you want to buy if you see one. But with the 88, it was obviously the first introduction of what we call 8mm Mauser. It was the 88 Patron was the official name for the cartridge. It had that nice kind of dull nose. It wasn't pointed.
Oh yeah.
And it was in the 5-round end block clips. But once that the 98 came about, you have sort of this era where the 98 looked like it was the way of the future, and then you had a major conflict. So what ultimately happened is in 1905, after the Germans updated their ammunition, one thing people don't realize is, the Gewehr 98 was originally chambered in 88 Patron. It had a 200-meter sight, and it was later on they were converted to the new S Patron ammunition, what some people will call the Spitzer round, but that's really not a official designation at all. But the 88, since they figured, hey, we've got this new ammo now, let's bring the 88 up to date. So you had the 8805, which we see a lot of them because they sent a lot of them to Turkey.
Yeah.
But the
seems like most 88s I see are 8805s converted.
You'll see a lot of them, and then the ones that weren't converted, they kind of hung around, but some of those were sent to South American countries, sold on the surplus market pre-World War I. So really a lot of them were updated in one way or another, but you still see ones that weren't updated that served in World War I. I've got a few that are pretty much standard. They maybe got the wartime dust cover added to the magazine, but they're otherwise unmodified 88s. But the big misnomers about especially the 8805 are a couple things, and if you want me to myth bust, I can.
Hold on before I need to go put my kids to bed, and I'll come back. But I wanted to talk about this real quick before we get off the 88, and then by the time I come back, they'll be off the 88.
That's good.
We compared the contemporaries of the 71 and the contemporaries of the 88. I think the 88 actually might be one of, if not the best response to the introduction of Smokeless.
Yeah.
Because the Lebel is garbage. I'm not going to argue that.
88 brings around the Lebel.
So the Lebel is garbage because it wasn't designed for this Smokeless. It was literally just the Kirkpatrick, and they just like make it Smokeless. And then so the US goes for the Krag, which was another issue like you talked about, and maybe not as big, but definitely a lot of anti-American sentiment when the US adopts a non-American design.
That's way later too.
Yeah, so that's 1892. So that's they get even longer time period to figure this out, and they pick something that's super like obscure in terms of that. Let's see. The Austro-Hungarians just basically take the 1886 and convert it to 8mm and go with that, and then that's essentially what they do. They improve the round a little bit, make it a little bit. They was semi-smokeless at first, and then it's full smokeless. So you see some minor updates along the way, but it's still the 1886 design, falling block action, and then the British, which the one of the infields, right? I don't know which
Longley.
The Longley.
MLE. Yeah.
And I don't think people would argue that the MLE is a pinnacle of design in this period.
Single loaded.
The Russians go with the M91, which stays because fuck it, I guess. That's Russia. The Carcano.
Carcanos, yeah.
Yeah. I would definitely say, that the 88 is definitely as good as stuff like the Carcano and the Mosin, M91. Like, it's as good as those, but it's just so overshadowed by the 1898. The pinnacle Mauser design just gets completely just overshadowed by that.
Well, I think a lot of people also don't contextualize this either too, is that like Russia kept the 1891, the Mosin, long after, like way, like they're making the 1891s in 1945 or 1944, and it's like that's like saying Germany's still making the Gewehr 88. Like it's same time period, so like people don't have that concept of like
and some countries made Mosins into the 50s. Like it's just
this is ancient.
Crazy.
And the Carcano is very similar in that regard as well, is that they just either one didn't have the money or two didn't have the desire or the expertise or infrastructure or whatever. And you're like, whoa, they didn't do anything, they just kept the design. And I think that Germany, didn't like immediately panic and pick something that was ridiculous, like trying to convert the 7184s to 8mm or some kind of smokeless cartridge. They never tried that. They were like
betterly to Carcano.
I would say the only rifle that I can think of that generation that I would rather have is a Swiss 1889.
Oh yeah.
But
I was thinking of major players, because at this time period you also have the Mauser rifles as well.
The Swiss, even with their better,
the Spanish Mausers, like you can argue like that's much
Belgian
better.
89.
So my thinking was, okay, you're going to go to war in 1890. What's your best option?
Probably the Spanish Mauser.
Spanish Mauser's 93.
Oh shit. No, isn't it? That's 92.
93.
93.
So that this is what I was thinking, right?
So like the Belgian then.
Belgian 1890s
or Argentine 91 or something.
Yeah, so I specifically picked 1890 in my brain because I was trying to categorize all the rifles. And like a Belgian 1890 would be good, or a Swiss 1889.
I think
Like
I think like these first, even skipping forward to 1890 from 1888, I think is like it's too much. Like these first few years, I think you kind of have to highly scrutinize to really understand, because it was
it's panic.
It was warp speed production and development in a lot of these countries.
Yeah, it's full on panic. Just terrified panic.
To give it its due, I think the 1888 was probably the best rifle in 1888.
All right, I gotta go. I'll be back.
Okay, we might still be talking about it when you get back, but I think the 1888 might have been the best rifle in the world in 1888, right? Because its main competitor, the Lebel, 1888, it's definitely better than that. You have the
Krawcheks.
Almost the same thing. You know, the Lebel, the Krawcheks, the 1888's better. The Mannlicher, right? The 1886 that it gets the clip from, it's definitely better than that because it's 8mm and it's smokeless. So I think you have this very narrow time when the 1888 was probably the best rifle in the world. And, like you said, Chris, it definitely did have its, teething problems, but, that's what I was thinking about when I was trying to I'm like, okay, well, what would I rather have? And I'm like, I came to 18. I'm like, okay, well, next year I can have a Swiss rifle. What after that? And I forgot about the Belgians, so that's on me. And I immediately went to Argentina. So I'm like, if it's 1890, I'm taking a Swiss gun. But if it's 1888, I'm taking that. If it's 1888, the commission rifle is the best rifle, right? Now,
I think so. Yeah.
Mauser did make an 1888. There is an 88 Mauser. It's got a really wonky magazine, but it was kind of Paul Mauser clapping back at the German commission on saying like, okay, I'll make something better right away. He comes up with his 1888 design and refines that then into the very classy 1889 design, which the Belgium adopted just the year later. So you have the Lebel, probably the best rifle that year that it was made, and then 1888, the best rifle ever made, and then the year after that, the Mauser 1898, probably the best rifle. It'd be kind of a hard toss-up to compare the Belgian 1889 to like the Swiss 1889 as far as that, but the Swiss rifles, they're just so good. It's hard to like throw them into the mix and being neutral and stuff now with the hindsight of that.
It's 12. Well, my reasoning for this, if you're curious, is it's 12 shots. It's smokeless. Yeah. It's got a mag cutoff, which everybody wanted a mag cutoff. It's the only rifle aside from the Krag.
Packet loaded.
Cut the mag off and then load it. Like it's okay. And I don't know. That was the only thing I could think of, and I was like, this is easily a winner. And that was it. So that's my thought trade.
But with the 1888 being the best rifle for at least that year, but just light speed development kind of happening.
And Mauser did this thing, which I love, which was he used South America as research and development. Like, oh, you guys hate each other? Try this gun out. Let me see how it works. Like,
he kind of, I don't know intentionally, but it just sort of happened to be he kept improving, and then like people kept buying the updated versions continually, and and what was going on? The rivalry in South America kind of paid for it. That
you guys really hate Ottomans. Those guys? Yeah. Here's the new hotness.
It's like that Stephen King movie, Needful Things. He's like getting this town to tear itself apart by giving each person what they want, and the people that say that South American Mausers have no history just don't know South American history, because there were plenty of conflicts.
Civil wars, conflicts, border conflicts, tons of little wars going on down there, and rivalries, long cultural, national rivalries. But with the 1888, going back to singing his praises one last time, I think the main thing, so being probably the best rifle in the world, because I can't think of a better one in 1888. And what sort of to me shows its viability or its like longevity as a design is the fact that it was used for decades later, by the Germans into World War I, but mostly the Turks and the Chinese using the 1888 well into the into the 30s and beyond. That's just I think I don't know, like everyone knows about hot Turkish 8mm, and what do you think the Turks were shooting in their 1888s?
Yeah, they didn't care, not at all.
So so to me, I think that usage of the 1888 by those countries just kind of shows like the longevity of the gun being able to be continuously upgraded and changed like that. So, but unfortunately, completely overshadowed and sticking with German infantry rifles, you kind of have to understand what was going on with Paul Mauser and his development a little bit, even though it's not like official German adoption. Yeah. So that's a super neat period of like Mauser development, really. 1898 to 1898 is such like this pivotal time period of Mauser development, and really just like the incredible innovation and little tweaks that came out of that. And really just, with the flag safety, I think that really set the standard for safeties on bolt rifles for a long time. And then the box magazine, the staggered, Mauser box magazine, probably the biggest being the stripper clip, the Mauser 1889 stripper clip. That's just like, okay, like, you could argue speed wise and everything with the Mannlicher clip. There's definitely some pros and cons, but just
if you want to understand this the best, take two rifles, go outside at night and load them. Yeah. It's omnidirectional. I mean, a Bavarian 88 is omnidirectional, but like it's omnidirectional. You can feel it. You can shove them in. It's good. You don't have to retrieve the clip. You just close the bolt. It is so nice and smooth. You can do it at night. Not very well, but better than a lot of things.
Yeah.
That's a good example there.
It's so, I know it sounds kind of stupid, but like it's a weapon of the infantry. The infantry don't get to go home at 5. And like, if you're gonna go gooning around at night, like you got to be able to load your gun. And It is, if you want to understand what I'm saying, take your rifle outside. You can put dummies in it, load it at night. It is, you'll get it.
Yeah, and the pitch black. It is
actually important. Yeah. No moon, heavy overcast. Kind of shitty out.
Because like night in the city or in your neighborhood is a little different than like out.
With the street lights going on. Yeah, no. Go out in the dark. Or turn all your lights off. Turn all your lights off in your room so you have no light coming into it, and try to load it. Yeah, it's pretty hard.
I told this story on here probably a couple times now, but my first tactical reenactment, I'm running around with the K98K, and we're out in this field at night during this night battle, and I was inside of a mock church, inside of like a mock village. And I was like trying to guard it, and I shot 5 rounds and I had to reload, but I'd never reloaded in the pitch black before. And, you kind of look down and you're not getting any visual information. I was like, oh, this is that's a whole different ball game, having to, feel your way around. But that I probably, though, that might be a plus for the Mannlicher clip. Honestly, it might be a little bit easier to load.
So I was thinking about like an 1895 is where my mind went, just because Aaron's not here, so someone's got to toe the 1895 line. And they have the slant clip that's not omnidirectional, so that they have the little things on them so you can feel it.
Little ribs that you have to feel. But if you're wearing gloves or your hands are frozen or you're panicking, your heart's racing, you're getting shot at,
that's what I was thinking of was actually the 1895, which has the clip that's slanted. You could do it with a commission. I've never had to load like a Carcano or a commission rifle under duress, or under stress, excuse me. But like, I'm sure that would probably be better. But even then, you have to get it in. It has to click. Did the other clip fall all the way out? Like there are some things to that. Like a French gun, the clips don't fall out.
Yeah,
with that World War I dust cover and the 1888 and the original Mannlicher clip, that'd be a whole thing because that's an extra step.
Yeah,
right?
with the springy thing.
Yeah, because you have to press the button to eject the clip to reload it with the dust cover on the 1888.
Yeah. Here's an exercise. So the just from what I remember from one of my firearms classes, you're looking at a soldier in battle, and the best way to simulate an adrenaline dump, because you know what happens when adrenaline kicks in, right? You go into fight or flight mode. The blood flow stays in your torso really more than anything, and reduces in your extremities. So if you stick your hands in ice water for about a minute, get them really cold. I mean, it'll hurt, but then go out and try and load one of those rifles. That would simulate trying to load one under duress when you got your adrenaline going, you're freaking out, and that could be an interesting exercise. Of course, use dummy rounds.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
That's a good idea. I don't know.
It almost sounds like a good video.
If you don't do it, it does. If you don't do it, you can't argue one way or the other, I feel. If you don't have practical experience. If you try it and you think that your way's better, you tried it. Maybe it is for you. Like, that's cool. But you can give the average dude, here, load this. Okay, we're going to turn the lights off. Okay, load this. And it's pretty simple. You can kind of feel your way through it.
Yeah. Yeah, intuitive.
Yeah. It's intuitive. It's a good way to say it.
Yeah. And the 88, it's definitely a dated design. Like, I have these objective standards on what makes a good bolt action. And I've gotten a little pushback only because I think there's people that are fans of certain designs, and so they defend certain design flaws in order to take up for these designs that they have emotional attachments to. But the two things that I point to is a bolt handle forward of the receiver bridge and the lack of a full connected receiver bridge.
Beautiful redirection.
I think are kind of two big cons of the 88 and other designs. But like I said, other people, I think they try to downplay the significance of that with the stuff like the Mauser M91. Yeah.
I don't. While I love German firearms, I'm not a fan of fanboyism. I mean, I'll be the first person to tell you that the Gewehr 98 is not the rifle I would want to have in World War I. If I was a soldier, I'd probably want a 1917 or maybe like a Car 98, but certainly not a Gewehr 98 in a trench setting. Certainly not a Gewehr 88 in a trench setting.
Yeah,
I did that video with Danny when I was at his house. We did that video.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot. I forgot what your number is. Is that what your number
AZ.
One was? Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Car 98 is certainly the to me a superior rifle for the setting. Obviously the K98K is an improvement over the Car 98. But still, for its time, it certainly outclasses the Gewehr in many, many respects.
Yeah.
So, but I know we kind of had started talking about what was done to the 88 to prepare for World War I and during the war. I can drill down on that.
Let us know, because it seems like there's a couple major updates that, like the 05, I know is the more common one, but then there's one the 1914 update.
Yeah, there's the three big ones are the 8805, the 88S, and I'll talk about the 88S because there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. Then there's also the 8814, which is the very rare one. You hardly ever see them. But the 8805 was done pre-war. That's another misconception. People thought, hey, maybe they were done during the war, but it was a pre-war conversion that was trying to bring the 88 to the more modern ammo. And what's most misunderstood about the 8805 is the fact that you see that the receiver bridge, or the receiver rather, the receiver ring has that milled out little notch in it. How you look at the face of the receiver, there's like a little milled out notch kind of in the shape
for the
of
Spitzer bullet.
Yeah. No, that is actually the misconception. So that was actually done if you put 88 Patron on a stripper clip.
He suckered
and
me.
If you look, what's that?
You suckered me. I'm drinking beer, I'm watching hockey, and you baited me into not paying attention, sir.
Yeah, no, it's so it was modified for stripper clips, and if you put the S Patron, the more modern ammo, on a stripper clip, it doesn't touch the receiver at all, the receiver ring. But if you put the 88 Patron on a stripper clip, that's slightly longer, and that actually you won't be able to load it without that notch in the receiver. So that's exactly why that's one of the more misunderstood things.
Wow.
The other thing about it is that the rear sight is different. It was actually a new made rear sight that was optimized for the new ammo. So you'll see a lot of them that were ground down, and you have the Eastern Arabic numbers put on them for Turkey. But that was originally a new rear sight that had Western numbers on it, and it was optimized for that new ammo. So the other misconception is a lot of times you will see those dust covers on the bottom that have a 1914 on them or 1915 on them. People think that they're 8814s because of that. That's not what happened. Those dust covers were not part of the original 8805 conversion. They were done wartime. They were added on wartime to keep dirt out of the magazine. So that's the other kind of misconception about them. But other than that, most of them went to Turkey. The 8805 wasn't really well received. It was there were a lot of reports of bulged barrels. There were problems because the 88 Patron was really what the rifle was built for. Once you put in the S Patron, the newer design, it was hotter, and there were reports of the bolts getting so hot you had to hit them with a tool to open them after several rounds, and they just weren't really liked. So the vast majority of the 8805s were sent to Turkey or Bulgaria, one of the two. A true matching German 8805 is pretty rare. I've seen maybe like a handful of them over the years. I was fortunate. I found one on Gunbroker a couple years ago that no one knew what it was. So I'm like, oh, okay. And I ended up getting it for, pretty good price. But people, I think, just didn't realize how rare it was. It flew below the radar. The thing about the 8805, though, is that was something that was on hand when war broke out. But there were plenty of other 88s that weren't updated at all. So that brings us to both the S rifle and the 8814. The S rifle was a conversion that was done wartime. You took an 88, you replaced the rear sight, you basically ground down the existing rear sight, milled out that, how 88s have that little small flip up sight?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
They disabled that. They milled that out so it was no longer usable. And then they ground and restamped the numbers on the rear sight, optimized for the S Patron ammo. So that is really an S rifle. And the only way you can tell if something's an S rifle is you look at the stock and there's a Crown S cartouche added to the stock. It's like an S with a big crown on top. And then you can look at the rear sight too. The rear sight is milled down, and the number graduations are different. And you will also have that flip-up sight is disabled. But those are really the only things. And a lot of people misidentify some Turk rifles for S rifles because in the 20s, they actually ground off the Eastern Arabic numbers in many cases and restamped Arabic, Western Arabic, our numbers on the rear sights. So that really confuses some people, but really you've just got a Turk rifle that was restamped. It's not an S rifle. And the S rifle does not have stripper clip conversion. It still used end block clips.
Yeah, that's the big one.
Yeah. Finally, the 8814, very similar to the 8805, but the biggest and most readily seen difference is instead of the kind of stuck-on stripper clip guides, they were welded on and kind of machined, so it looks a lot more crude as to how the stripper clip or the stripper clip guides were added. Those are really rare, though. They were done by a company called Venuswerk, that basically these rifles were sent to. They reworked them. They also reworked the Chinese 1907s. If you guys have ever covered those, they also reworked, I think, the Belgian 89s that were converted to 8mm Mauser. So they were really a firm that specialized in those conversions.
Now, but what was the purpose of the 8814 if like the 8805 existed?
So basically, it was a way of modernizing the 88 a little bit. Enabling stripper clips was a big thing. Obviously, the stripper clip was superior to the M block clip. Also, it was a means of bringing up the sights to match that new ammunition, because you can shoot a little bit further with the S Patron than the 88 Patron. It was just a nicer cartridge.
Okay, but doesn't the 8805 is also stripper clip fed, right?
The 8805 is also stripper clip. So basically, the 8814 is kind of like just a later and more crude wartime conversion, whereas the 8805 was a pre-war conversion.
Okay,
that's the biggest difference.
Okay, that that kind of makes sense then. Okay,
but it's the S rifles. So S rifles are fairly uncommon. I own a few of them, but they oftentimes fly below the radar on auctions and gunbroker. They're just not, people don't pay attention, but you can find a pretty neat, pretty special rifle just by looking if there's pics, if you can get a picture of the rear sight, if you see on the stock that there's a Crown S on the stock. Those are the big indicators. Oftentimes the S rifles have that wartime dust cover covering the hole in the magazine.
Yeah. There's a
but they
friend
fly under the radar.
Yeah,
I feel like. Go ahead.
There's a friend of mine who had an 88 with the dust cover on the bottom, and he wanted to take it off. He's like, "No, I don't want this. Like, I want to be able to, the clips to fall through and everything." And I was like, "Okay, I mean, I wouldn't if I was you, but hey, if you take it off, I'll buy it from you."
Yeah. And so the difference too, another thing, the 8805 dust cover is actually a little bit of a different animal. So the that one is just literally a stamped metal dust cover that covers the mag. The 88 regular 88 dust cover that we're still using end blocks, that has a little spring inside of it that is kind of riveted on, and the purpose of that was supposed to help eject the end block clip when it was empty.
The original ping gun, ping rifle. Yeah,
I feel like a lot of 88s actually go undervalued. I bought my 88 off a gunbroker. I think I paid $250 for it. Like, it's not bad. It's not like a horrible one, but
yeah, they do not. So even a matching and advertised as matching with good pictures, 88, they sell for like half as much as Gewehr 98s. It's actually and when you get one that's nice, it's matching, good shape, whatever, it has that same nice pre-war feel to it that a pre-war Gewehr 98 has. but people just don't like them because they're misunderstood. I mean, they were people think they're a bad rifle. People think they didn't really serve at all, which they did. Like I said, until there was a severe rifle shortage in Germany as the war broke out, and it took them a couple years to make enough Gewehr 98s to arm the full army. And 88 served extensively, at least through 1916.
Yeah, the 88s, they held the line for that rifle shortage. That I think the biggest like weird misconception of German World War I shortages is everybody assumes it was like World War II, where like you have a bunch of stuff in the beginning and then everything gets more and more scarce as the war went on. But World War One, it was the opposite. And the beginning was the oh shit, we didn't ramp up production before we like started this. And then there was the ramp up in the early war years. And then so you have like the ersatz bayonets, the German ersatz bayonets are an early war thing and not a late war thing. Much. Like the opposite of World War II.
Yeah, such an interesting thing. Yeah, and by the end of the war, the Gewehr 98 production, you had like Danzig, Amberg, they were throwing off so many rifles by then, and Mauser was sending them to Turkey. DWM was they were kind of slowing down a little bit, focusing more on machine guns. But late war Gewehr 98s, the 18 dated ones, you almost never see them except the Turk Mauser ones because they weren't really issued. A lot of the manufacturers stopped, and the ones that didn't stop, they were low-hanging fruit sitting in depots when the war ended. And when the Allies came in and said, hey, you have to reduce your weapons, those 18s were among the first weapons destroyed. So if you find a matching 1918 dated Gewehr 98, that's something special.
Yeah. It's so interesting being the complete opposite with World War One. Yeah. Just something, I think World War II really does just kind of overshadow World War One to most people, especially here in the US, I think more so than other countries.
Yeah, I always get a little chuckle when people use, especially in the US, the term Great War, because it's a very European term, is I hear it used much more in Canada and Europe. And, I always ask when an American says that, I'm like, so what's World War II? Is that the Greater War or?
It was great for us. We made a lot of money.
Yeah, no, it's but really,
and then we went over there and we stole all their shit.
You look
liberated.
World War One, we were kind of yes, we got involved a little bit later in World War II as well, but World War One, we were kind of the Johnny-come-latelys. We were neutral for so long, and it really wasn't the national identity kind of event that you had with Australia, Canada, all these other, like I talked to some of my Canadian friends, and World War One was just like that seminal moment when they really, they were no longer British, they were Canadian. So it really, it impacted them. Therefore, there seems to be a lot more interest in World War One, among countries that had that national identity experience.
Yeah.
In the U.S., that was really World War II for us, because we come out of World War II and, it was really, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were the two least battered countries coming out of the war.
Yeah. World War One, we have the World War One memorial here in Kansas City, and it was built before World War II. And so the big words on it is, the World War. On the World War One memorial, and there's a joke about was it like a time traveler or something? It goes back to somebody in like the 20s, and they're like, "Yeah, I was in the World War," and the guy's like, "Oh, which one?" The guy's like, "Which one?"
Yeah, it's a good museum. If you're in that area, I would recommend going to it. It is really cool. They have some really cool shit that I've never seen and never thought I would get to see. So,
yeah, it's
You guys still talking or no?
We are. We are now. I guess we could move forward now that Aaron's back. We can move forward to the 1898 Mauser, which is
you haven't gotten off that yet.
Yeah, well, we talked a lot about 88s. What were all the variants?
Okay.
And I don't know.
There's two variants.
I ragged on some M95s.
You got the OG one. You have the 8805, the 88S, the S conversion. Not the misnomer. A lot of people think that just because an S was stamped on the receiver, it's an S rifle. That's not true. It has to have the rear sight modifications and the S stamp.
14?
No, the 14 came even later.
You missed it, Aaron.
Yeah, missed that.
Yeah, well,
we didn't talk about the carbines.
I was
more than 91.
I was gonna stay out of carbines and just stick with infantry rifles for brevity here.
Okay,
because we're not going to be able to get through this.
All right, let's.
We're
good. We're good. So in 1891, there's a rifle.
All right. Well, before you talk about the 1889, you got to talk about, which we kind of already did. Paul Mauser, clapping back after the commission rifle and coming out with his first the 1888, and then he refines that into the wonderful 1889. He sells to Belgium.
No, you missed the joke, which is the Car 88 and the Gewehr 91 are the same gun. They're both 88s.
Yeah, and they actually made the Gewehr 91 out of excess 88 carbine receivers and just scrubbed them and restamped them. You can actually see on some Gewehr 91s like a ghost Car 88.
Yeah. Well, I was giving Danny shit because we're not talking about carbines. All right, let's talk about the Gewehr 91.
All right, we're talking about infantry rifles, not the Gewehr 91. Okay.
I'll go get my 88. Yeah.
And let's not forget.
Where's that bolt at, Danny?
It's right. I have the bolt's over right there. It's next to it.
I was gonna say yeah. I hope you have a bolt for that thing.
I do. I have two bolts.
Mike, Danny.
Oops. I have two bolts that together they make one bolt for this thing. But it's an S marked. It's a VC Schilling Sul 1891 dated.
Nice.
Gewehr 91.
Yep. Got that nice Mon liquor stock on it.
The Gewehr 91 was the carbine issued to foot artillery, and that was a specific carbine just for them. And they were used in some other cases. They used them for bicycle troops too.
Okay, so when I say we're talking about rifles here, I'm talking about just the American definition of rifle, not Gewehr versus carabiner, because we're not going to do that right now. We're not going to do that to ourselves.
Yeah, Jared, quit baiting me into talking about sidebars here.
I mean,
if everyone really wants to, I'll come back and do a carbine episode later.
Yeah, we would have to definitely do a carbine because there's way more variations.
I was technically right.
Yeah,
cavalry, carbines, artillery. Yeah.
Well, then you get into the Gewehr 98, and it's the weird carbines that are after the war that people don't understand, like the designations of, correct? Like the
R98B.
Well, no, the G98M that everybody.
Oh yeah,
said.
yeah.
Oh yeah,
yeah. The collector term, but everyone calls them Gewehr 98Ms. But yeah, it's it really was just the an transitional, conversion. So
all right, so to get to the Gewehr 98, we first need to talk briefly about the Mauser getting to that point, which was Paul Mauser coming up with his rifle in 1889, which it was a single stack magazine at the time with a clip. It was clip loaded, the original clip. Now there's three different sort of iterations of the Mauser clip, and this was the first one. It's sort of the slick sided clip.
Let's clarify, not in block, stripper clip.
Yeah. When I say clip, I mean clip.
Yeah, well, because there are M blocks at this time period too, so you gotta think about that.
Yeah. Also, when you Google it, you have to be careful in your wording of Swedish stripper clips.
Yeah, you do.
So you have the OG sort of stripper clip. You have the Gewehr 1889. Everybody kind of knows about the Argentine 1891, sort of a continuation of that. And then at 1892 to 1893, you kind of have this sort of great improvement to double stack magazine. So you have the 5-round flush fitting double stack magazine. You have bolt improvements, bolt simplifications, toolless field
Safety
stripping
improvements after he lost his eye.
But he lost his eye with a semi-auto.
Yeah, he was testing a self-loading rifle.
So there's many improvements going on. It's hard to describe here, just sort of over voice going to it. You have the so from the 1893 to the 1898, you have a few kind of improvements. The Swede contract, I think, really kind of brought a lot of those big improvements out of the rifle. And then going to the actual 1898 from like the Swede, I would say it's more like that third safety lug, and then kind of going to cock on open instead of cock on close is sort of the main kind of difference.
Danny and
there.
I argue about the Pinnacle pre-1898, and he thinks it's the Swedish, and I think it's the Chilean.
I think it's that the bolt rib and the guide underneath the receiver bridge and the Swede that carried over to the 1898. I think is just the big reason why the Swede is better. It just prevents so much. It prevents a lot of binding, especially when the bolt is near fully retracted out of the gun. Like I did a video, shooting the Chilean 1895 and the Swede M96, and those dates are kind of weird because the Chilean is really just a Spanish copy, and the 96 is really just a 94 copy. But I think it's probably the Pinnacle pre 1898 design, and it was so good. So now what we think of as the 1898, the Gewehr 98, it was patented in 1895. Actually, a lot of those improvements were patented by Mauser in 1895. Friggin' Luger, Georg Luger, patented the safety lug on the Mauser rifle. Weirdly enough, he on the sly patented that. That's a whole thing that we talked with Mauro about. That was pretty.
Yeah. I wasn't aware about how much high school backstabbing bullshit drama there was in this time period.
It's
and
the pet.
And Mauser,
that old school petty.
The design for the C96 and making up the whole thing about the guys inventing it in the garage as just propaganda. It was like, no, we totally didn't steal this design.
Yeah.
And it was just like, what?
Yeah, what? There's some good drama back then with a lot of these designs.
Yeah, and the Lova thing that we talked about, where they just stole the company out from underneath them, and then hired him on and made him live on the property. Like he was basically like a domestic servant, essentially.
Indentured servant, yeah.
This is an indentured servant living on his own factory grounds, and the whole fighting between. And Luger being just a total asshole about everything. And was it the C93? That's the
Bergman.
Boschart. Yeah. Him being just a total dick and being like, no, it's perfect. I'm not going to update it.
Borchardt reminds me, this is a little off topic, but Borchardt and his attitude reminds me of exactly Schmidt's attitude with the Schmidt-Rubin rifle. They both were like, nope, our design is perfect. It's not going to be improved. This is it. They both had that. And somebody else came along and and then somebody else comes along and makes a better mousetrap. So
yeah, it's just really weird. It's
too.
Weird, it's funny.
I like it because that's my kind of hatred, and I will teach my kids to hate your kids, and I expect you to do the same.
Oh man,
I can get behind that.
That story about Henry Ford, where I guess his son and some of the employees of the company made him like a special, like slightly updated Model T, and he was so pissed that they had messed with the Model T design that Henry Ford pretty much like smashed up the car with his bare hands and just like was so pissed at them for even trying to improve his design. Pretty people just get so egotistical about their creation, and
I don't think
theirs
Mauser
and
really
not
ever
anyone
had
else's.
any. Mauser didn't really seem to have that kind of attitude about like, no, everything can be improved.
Yeah, I mean he definitely did. There's just lots of improvements from that point on.
Especially that rear sight.
Well, okay, so now the roller coaster sight was
that's that commission coming back in. It's like,
no, that was a guy. Chris, you got to back me up on this. That was a guy just convinced the Kaiser to basically make them do that. That wasn't even like, you can't find that on German commercial rifles like before 1898. Like the Peruvian 1909, they just did it because it's all the Germans did it.
Okay, here's the thing here's what I think is weird is people can just like write to the Kaiser. Because the same thing happened with the first carbines. They went to the police for the Ruhr with the coal riots, and it's like, man, we really could use
the
like,
Car 88. Yeah, that one. I forget his name, but he was one of the local police guys, and he wrote to the Kaiser. He's like, "Hey, we need help. You don't want these people rioting." So they diverted some military stocks of the carbines to the rural police, and they wanted to put it down.
I just love the concept of this because it happens more than once. It's like,
hey
Willie, this is pretty fucking cool. Like you want in on this? And he's like, yeah, let's do that.
The Longa-Vizier. The
Longa-Vizier.
Named after Lieutenant Colonel Longa.
Yeah. So
it's just it'd be like writing to the president being like,
a bad sight through some BS got it added there. Not at all because it was from Mauser or anything like that.
Chris,
no.
What was the original caliber he submitted the 1898 in? It wasn't an 8mm.
No, I believe it was I believe there was a 6mm trials version that was tested. At least there was one in Mauser's collection. Yeah,
because I'm pretty sure because I remember reading about this because when I looked at the 1895 Lee Navy, this time period, Mauser's like, oh, the 6.5 Swedish works really well. And I think he's starting to get on the idea of smaller bullets faster. And he's starting to get that idea in his head. And then that's what he submitted. And then obviously we get the same issue that a lot of these other countries ran into, which is just, oh, we're not going to change the rest of the supply chain for this one gun, so we're just not going to do that.
Yeah.
It's the same as 30-06 and 276 Pedersen.
I mean, it's tons that you can name thousands of cartridges. Like the freaking 303 British is another one. It's just like, oh no, we already made all this.
That's a perfect round.
Yeah.
All right. There's nothing wrong with that round.
So, okay, so leading into the Gewehr 98, I think I walked through the improvements.
Maybe by the time I get back, you'll be on the end of the Gewehr 98. It's
been a couple hours. We're into the third period. It's 3-1 if you're keeping score at home.
Oh, nice.
No, they're losing. They pulled their goalie, but we got a new guy. He's good.
So and if you look, the development of the Gewehr 98, they went through a lot of kind of wonky trials models. I know we were talking about different calibers, but there were iterations of it that had a barrel jacket. There were, they tried a bunch of different things. If you look in Storrs' 98 book, you can see some of those weird trials versions. But ultimately, they settled on the Gewehr 98 that we know and love. But really, the Gewehr 98 that came out originally was not it looked a little different. And there were a number of improvements that were made over the course of its life, to correct little issues, sometimes big issues. One major modification was in the event of the adoption of the new ammunition, the S Patron that we had talked about with the 88s. There was a number of updates, essentially with the rear sight. That was the big thing that was changed. So if you looked at a Gewehr 98 that was made, say, in 1899 or 1900, it would have a different looking Longe-Visier sight, and it had it was up to 200 meters was the minimum sight setting. The leaf looked a little different. It was shaped a little different. The slider was a little bit different. But really, that was the original design, because the Gewehr 98 was designed for 88 Patron. Later on, when the new ammunition was introduced, the S Patron, there was a program of reworking these Gewehr 98s and converting them to fire S Patron. The rear sight changed, and what you'll see is that the rear sight sleeve often wasn't changed. In fact, very frequently you'll see a sleeve that's marked for 200, but it'll have a 400 meter leaf. And
the rear sight could only go to 4 stops. Yeah,
exactly.
Because not knowing that and just seeing a Gewehr 98 and 400 meters as the minimum rear sight, you just go like, what? Like, that's stupid. Why would they decide to have a minimum sight distance of 400?
They thought that's what it was going to be.
But the original 200, that's not that far off, really. I mean, you see that up until the 30s, countries adopting a minimum rear sight distance of 200. Like the Brazilian 1935, its minimum rear sight distance is 200 meters. So yeah,
it really, at the time, it just made sense. Obviously, as World War I went on, a 400 meter minimum setting just made about 0 sense.
Well, everyone's looking at it with the value of hindsight.
Yeah. 100% at the time.
Yeah. Well, they only fought it this far. Yeah, but like 3 years ago, they figured out that they could shoot 2,000 meters with it. Why would we fight at 100? We're going to fight at like 500. Is the thinking?
Yeah. I mean, you were looking at it at the time. They were looking at it without that benefit of hindsight as to what military doctrine was at the time. And they were expecting, hey, we're going to see these guys across the other side of the field. We want to get the drop on them. That whole idea of volley fire just made sense.
They were fighting in lines still?
Yeah, they were still fighting in lines. Well, you look at the French, they were still wearing the red pants and the bright uniforms. And, the Germans pre-war were wearing the bright Dunkelblau, the blue uniforms. So, yeah, it doctrine changed when war broke out. But back to the rear sights, you'll see after the new ones made after started to move toward a 400 meter sleeve out of the gate with the slider, but there were modified ones. So if you ever find a Gewehr 98 that's in S Patron, or excuse me, 88 Patron that hasn't been modified, that's something that's pretty
pretty scarce. Yeah. It was around 1905, wasn't it, when they switched?
1903 is when the new round was kind of rolled out, but it was a gradual changeover. You also had a change in the bolt. The bolt had really narrow gas escape holes originally. Those were widened, I think, partially because of the new ammunition. There were also, little minor things that were done. Certainly the one thing that came out later was the sears on the trigger had a propensity to collect mud and really corrode in bad conditions. So they went in and they did some machining to kind of make it a better design. But ultimately, as with any rifle, it had already been in service for 14 years by the time World War I broke out. So there was some time to improve things.
That's the cool thing too, is that they didn't just sit on it. They did fix the things. And I do enjoy that, because you see like a 1900 versus a 1915, they're different. There's different nuances about them because they made them better. They didn't just stop and continue to make junk. They fixed the problems.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And it's very for most military rifles, for basic mechanical improvements. I feel like there's only a couple countries you see that from. I think really like Great Britain and
England.
And Germany, really, like with these kind of major mechanical improvements to their rifles that are willing to do it. Because like the Russians with the Mosin, the Italians with the Carcanos, it's just, hey, that's it. The bolt stays the bolt, except for maybe like a, some like really odd change, or like a caliber conversion, maybe with the Carcanos. Like it's just, the action is the action, and it just kind of stays.
The French and the Berthiers, like, it's 3-shot. We'd really like 5. I mean, it's just 2 rounds. Come on.
My favorite part of that is, so my a little digression here. So my favorite part about the whole 3-shot Berthier deal is that the French didn't want a Lebel carbine because it would be 3 shots, and 3 isn't enough. So let's make a Lebel, or let's make a Berthier carbine. And then they made it 3 shots. Yeah, tube fed, it's faster to load and stuff like that. But just going based on the magazine, size, like that argument just kind of seems a little silly. I know they made it bigger in 1916 up to 5, but
it's still funny.
Yeah. So so the Gewehr 98 sort of staying as the main rifle through World War I. And now it's kind of the whole, K98A is, I know it's got the carabiner in quotations name to it. So not a carbine, but it's a short rifle, but it's carbine in name. That's kind of a weird, almost, it's like a quasi substitute standard rifle maybe for the Germans, because it's a standard short rifle sized rifle. It's not like a real carbine, with a like a short, like 18-inch barrel or something. It's got like a 22, 23-inch barrel. It's a short rifle, and it was massively used by the Germans in World War I, and I think that it's kind of this quasi, not an official infantry rifle, but was used so much in an infantry capacity when maybe it wasn't initially designed to be that. That to me is just kind of like a more interesting part of that, and I think it's probably worth bringing up because I'm not sure exactly how much the K98A is kind of led into the future of Mauser rifles, the 1898 after World War I. But it's just kind of an interesting point to bring up, and I think the big question that I hear from a lot of people, this kind of moves us past World War I here, but kind of the big question that I hear from a lot of people is why did the Germans go with the K98K eventually instead of just sticking with the K98A, which they were already making? They already had logistics for, factories making it, and which is, not a super, talked about aspect of it, which really the K98A is kind of a more specialty rifle, different receiver size, ring sizes and all that. But
that's what I was going to say, is the A is a different gun. The K98K is like a shorter Gewehr.
Yeah, it's a large ring, and we also kind of tend to overlook the 98A, as I call it. It was not the original Car 98. There was the actual Car 98, which was made 1903, 1904, and that was a short kind of Car 88 looking thing.
Yeah,
that
an actual
really
carbine.
It didn't do well at all. It was chambered in 88 Patron, so it was already obsolete when it was made. It had a tremendous kick. It had a big ass fireball that came out of the front of it when you fired it, and the troops just did not like it. So they were only made for a short time, and most of them were relegated to the colonies, and some were even sold to Mexico later on, and end up typically the ones in the U.S. came in through Mexico, but just sort of a failed design, and they came up later with what we know as the Car 98A. It was a longer design, which kind of mitigated the recoil and the big ass fireball, and was designed as sort of a universal carbine for both cavalry and artillery. It had the stacking hook. It had the side-mounted sling that was good for a guy on horseback. You had a much more friendly experience, like we were talking about earlier. When we were chatting about the which rifle would I want to have in World War One. A couple of us said the Car 98 because really it was a much more pleasant shooter. It had the bent bolt. It really felt more like a battle rifle.
Yeah. Much lighter, much more handy. The Car 98, I guess we'd have to get on the same page as far as nomenclature, because I know there's two Car 98As, but the short rifle Car 98, which if you say K98 or Car 98, in hindsight, with stuff like the Polish K98 and then the K98K, which is referred to as K98 and all that stuff, I'm just going to refer to it because we all know that AZ is not the correct term. But if you say AZ, everybody knows exactly what you're talking about.
I know it's one of those things where I've given up trying to fight it. It normally drives me batty, but so many people still say it. It's a collector term.
Yeah.
AZ was really just the German for stacking hook in the the other features of it. It was long. It was stacking hook and the bayonet lug. But again, it's if everyone knows it as that, and that helps differentiate it, do it. And I'll just kind of cringe a little bit every time someone says it.
But yeah, so that's the only thing. Everybody knows what the AZ is. But so going through World War One to the post World War One period, really that whole time frame is really fascinating, with like the Freikorps, the fighting that's going on in Eastern Europe at the time. It's just like very not well known, not generally well known part of history for many people. European history, and especially German history. But it's just like the guys just kept fighting. Like they just left France and they just went east and kept fighting after the war. And as far as the German rifles, I would say, right, with the SS, the adoption of the SS cartridge, and then the Gewehr 98, we talked about the not technically correct Gewehr 98M term, so 98M, which is just like a collector term for the updated rear sight for the new SS Patron cartridge. Now, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong here. The SS Patron cartridge is really, that's like one capital S, one lowercase s, not having anything to do with any political.
Lowercase capital. Yep.
An ammo designation not having to do with any political organization.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the bad SS. No.
Yeah. Yeah. So the SS Patron. Now it was a lighter loaded round, if I remember correctly.
Yes, it was it was better optimized. We had learned a lot from World War One, from just generally getting better with smokeless powder. It was kind of what they call like a boat tail round was the SS Patron, and it was just designed to be a better performing cartridge. and it was designed for being shot out of a shorter barrel. We don't need those big 30-inch barrels anymore. We don't need kind of all that volley fire doctrine that spawned the Gewehr 98. So it really was an improvement in many ways. And naturally, the Germans, when they had the improved cartridge, they wanted to roll it out to all their weapons. So the Gewehr 98, there were still many of them on hand. So converting them made a lot of sense. Were all the Gewehr 98s in German possession converted? No. In fact, one thing that I'll speak to is, we all know the 1920 stamp that you'll see on the face of interwar rifles. A lot of people will call it a double date or a 1920 rework or something like that. Do you guys know the actual meaning of the 1920?
The 1920 didn't have to do with the year as much as it did just the acceptance into German inventory, like the official inventory.
It was a property mark, nothing more, nothing less. Yeah.
So because they did a buyback program where you could buy, you could take your shit and be like, yeah, I got like 5 helmets, 3 rifles or whatever. But if you had a 1920 mark, they knew you stole it.
Correct. Yeah, they did a mandatory buyback, and it was phased. It's like, hey, you'll get more money if you turn it in by this date. You get a little less money if you turn it in by the next date. Then it just became we're not giving you any money. We won't charge you if you turn it in. And then after that, if you were caught with it, you were prosecuted.
But the Freikorps still had MG08s on top of pickup trucks, and that's because
they were government sanctioned, much like the EWB and some of those other militias. They, in fact, a lot of the Gewehr 98s that maintained that Langevisier site were ones that were with a militia like the EWB, and they were stashed during that mandatory buyback or after, and later recovered. Like I've got a one with still the old style sight on a Gewehr 98 was never really reworked, and it was stashed most likely and brought home by a World War II veteran. So, but yeah, the 1920, wherever you can, just make sure people know it's a property mark, not a double date. Because otherwise, if that was a year that things were getting reworked, the depots were very, very busy in 1920.
I'm back. I'm not going to turn my camera on because I'm eating.
That's
fair. The other thing we were talking about, the SS Patron. How do you pronounce that? Does it sound like the liquor?
SS Patron, yeah.
Okay.
It's Patronen. That's the correct German pronunciation. If you want to do it, just do it that way, Aaron.
I think the other reason, was because the regular S Patron had a lot of muzzle flash out of the shorter barrel rifles.
Yes.
Is that correct? So, so here's another example where we were talking about how the Russians just left shit the way it was. That's why the M44 is the fireball thrower.
Yes.
It's because the Russians never changed it.
M38s do it too.
Yeah, 100%.
That's the fireball, is that because they didn't give a shit to make separate or update their ammo.
Yeah. And a lot of those carbines that like existed on a large scale, like except for the Russians, is like, they were little like 6.5, cartridge, 6.5 millimeter cartridges seem to be like the more successful little tiny carbines, like actual like 18-inch barrel carbines is like, when I say carbine is what I mean, not like the German carabiner 22, 23-inch barrel size.
Right. So you're talking like the Italians or the Swedish.
Exactly. The Italian and the Swedes. That kind of long lasting actual carbine. It's kind of in that sort of flavor of cartridge. Now, you don't see that really again. Like that original K90, actual carbine 98, the K98A, the original one. That's like the last real Mauser carbine that I can think of. With the real short barrel. an 8mm Mauser that the Germans adopted. Very short-lived, very rare. But now going back to the interwar period, you have the Gewehr 98Ms, which is just that transitional updated to the SS Patron cartridge, and then right after that, I think is what the Karabiner B.
Yeah, the Carbiner 98B, which it's really anything but a carbine. It's full length like the Gewehr 98. It was updated. Obviously, it came in the SS Patrona as a matter of straight from the factory. But it was different in a number of ways. It had a bent bolt. It had a side mounted sling. It really, in many respects, resembles the Radfar, which was the
the
bicyclist rifle in World War One. That many similarities. Really, the only difference is that the rear band has a spring on the 98B, whereas the Rad had a screw underneath it that threaded into the bottom of the cleaning rod nut. But they called it a carbine, and I've seen this several places. One place was because, or one reason was calling it a carbine sounded less aggressive than a rifle. I don't know that I necessarily buy that. But the other thing with it was that, and this really pissed off the cavalry. The cavalry had to adopt the Car 98B instead of the 98A, which they really liked because that was a lot more handy if you were on horseback. So cavalry was naturally pissed off. The people in vehicles or close quarters probably weren't as happy. But the 98B really survived and served for quite a while. It's just it had a low survival rate as it pertains to what was brought back to the U.S.
Being pre-war, and having to survive the war is very. The earlier it is, the less unlikely it is to survive.
Yes, and also they sold or gave a lot of the 98B to other countries as aid. Places obviously a lot of them came in from Albania. Ended up there at the end of the war for whatever reason. They were imported over. They tend to be mixed masters, but that's usually the first 98B that someone finds. But there are matching bringbacks back there that have come back here, I mean. So, but the 98B really was, again, kind of just a progression to where you started seeing this movement toward the turn down bolt with the cutout, the updated tangent sight for the SS Patrona, and then also you had that side-mounted sling, which really became standard later on all the other rifles. You had a stock disc, a takedown ferrule, as some call it, and then you end up with a kind of a precursor. It's basically a long K98K, and then your earlier comparison to the Gewehr 98, basically just being shortened, is pretty true because.
So what time period are we talking about with the K98B?
1920s, and a significant amount. Not all the 98B pattern rifles were made made by the same company, but the true Car 98Bs were made by Simpson. They were again. This kind of gets back to the anti-Semitic thing, but they were the company that was given legal approval to still manufacture firearms.
Yeah, they're the only ones that could make them after the Versailles Treaty.
Correct. So you had some clandestine rifles that were made in that pattern too. The other one really being the S-28 rifles. Those were made in secret. We're still trying to figure out exactly 100% what the story was with them. There have been links to a couple different companies, DWM, Mauser, but we don't see enough of them to necessarily come to any conclusions. So I won't make any bold theories here. But the S-28s basically look like a 98B, smell like a 98B, but they have a blank receiver. And the sometimes even will have a fake 1920 stamp on them to make them look like they're older. And they even have imperial acceptance and ciphers on the stock. So
sneaky,
kind of very, very tricky.
Yeah.
This is what I like about. So everyone assumes that in 1933 they started ramping up production of all of these things. It's not true.
No, it's going on. Yeah.
The Weimar Republic
accelerated it.
Yeah,
but really, it was going on for a long time before that.
The Weimar Republic did these things. It's just if you look, you can see it. But everyone just assumes, oh, this is exactly when it started. No, they were like doing tank trials in Russia.
Yeah,
they were trying to continually stay up on everything because they were so restricted, but they knew that they had to stay current. So they did things like this. They sold rifles to the post office. There are K98Ks that are for the
post office.
Yeah, for the post office or for the train.
These are totally. These are for the postmen to carry. These are definitely for the train workers.
Standard model, right?
These are
standard.
The Banner K, they call them. It's basically like a prototype K98K. The only difference is that the front band, there was a rear band spring, and then there was like a peg that goes through the front band that keeps the front band in place. But yeah, they were 1933, 34. And then at that time, you had the first K98K being made. Actually, I think the true K98K was started first at J.P. Sauer, and Mauser followed up shortly thereafter. They were the two startup contractors for making the true K98K. And then other makers were added as they ramped it up. But really, it was the culmination of all the improvements they had made in earlier years, and they really didn't any changes to the K98K after 1934 or so were really just improvements to maybe make it a little easier to manufacture, a little less machining to ramp up for the war effort.
Yeah. But it is a very interesting period of like going from Gewehr 98 to K98K and all these little weird variations in between that are, less known, less seen. But they're
still out there. So if you watch like a propaganda video, they're only going to show the newest hotness thing to the people back home. But if you look at pictures, you can see especially like SSVT guys in France with Kar 98 AZs. You can see guys going into Russia with long German rifles.
Oh yeah.
In 41.
I have plenty of photos of Germans with long rifles that are obviously G98Ms.
They didn't just give up. And you'll see like pack crews, like 3 guys got K98Ks and like 2 guys got A's. And I like that. Like, they didn't just throw the guns away. They still used them.
Yeah, they were all used. Yeah. There's a few famous photos of K98As in Russia. And they got, they made it all the way into Russia. So all these guns were being used, and they all, just like with any sort of war of attrition, these earlier guns are the first ones to get chewed up and spit out, and so are the way less common ones, than the later ones. But kind of zooming to the K98K, kind of after that adoption, like Chris said, it's really no real major changes as far as functionality to design, but everything just having to do from that point with making it faster. So it's pretty much there's a couple little tweaks. The laminate stocks from solid stocks. I was
just about to say the stock,
and then
I would consider the laminate stock a major upgrade. And it's a lot stronger stock than a one piece.
It was essentially done though because their limitation of walnut. It was a they didn't have the materials. Obviously when they started ticking off the U.S., they weren't getting any more American walnut. A lot of the European walnut forests had already been consumed. So
no, I understand it's faster, it's cheap to manufacture, but like it's also
it is
like
strong though too.
they had the benefit of it being a stronger stock. So like it checked off all these boxes of like this is way better.
Yeah. And
it was not laminate was not a downgrade like beechwood was in World War One.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
And now you do have the slight tweak of going to the cupped butt plate because of those layers, because of those wood layers at the end. That cupped butt plate does go over and kind of squeeze and hold on to that the wood laminate layers. And that's
separation.
And so as far as that, again, that sort of maybe more goes into the manufacturing than an actual something purposefully done for functionality. I know you do see flat butt plates on early laminates, but they did switch to cup butt plates.
It was a functional change. Basically, the flat butt plate was a lot easier to damage the stock, especially once you got to the laminated wood. You could cause delaminations if there was too much moisture, what have you. So that's why in 41 they started moving toward the cupped butt plate. It's just a better design.
If you're in adverse terrain too, it actually does do good in planting the rifle down to get, like, if you're going up a hill, I'd rather have a cupped butt plate to go up the hill and spike the rifle in the ground. Like, oh, they didn't do that. Yes, they did. Like, yes, they did. And it actually does make it a little bit better.
Yeah, that's one of the reasonings for the side plate on the 3340 is doing something like that. But the K98Ks, very few functional improvements. Maybe the front sight hood, going to that instead of the removable front sight hood. But then very similar rifle. Nothing anything like with the Bavarian 98 until the very end. The Kriegs, the Kriegs model, which again is just manufacturing, speeding up manufacturing, and there's lots of weird variations there at the end of the K98Ks, like that completely simplified rear sight that kind of more reminds you of something that would be like on a Carcano or something, just like a welded sheet metal rear sight with a slit in it, or like on a last ditch Arasaka kind of style rear sight.
No more nice hole in the stock. They just drill a hole in the butt plate or the cup plate.
Very crude at the end, but overall very, very, very similar. And the K98Ks, even in 1945, you could take a Gewehr 98 bolt, of a gun made in 1900 and stick it in a K98K in 1945, and it's probably going to work. You have such that continued lineage of rifle, for those 45 years or so. It's
I have a Czech 98-22 bolt and a K98K. And it works. And I got the last event I was at, one of the guys was giving me shit. I'm like, do you know what a 98-22 is? No. Let me educate you. And I went out on this big spiel, but oh, your gun has a straight bolt. My loaner gun has a straight bolt, but it actually shoots. It shoots really well. The headspace is all right. It's a Czech bolt. They're good guns.
Yeah, they're
all
the
the
98.
same.
The Model 98 action has so much grace built into it with regard to interchangeability. Headspace is really, you hear a lot of people freaking out about headspace, but I think I've maybe seen one Model 98 that didn't headspace acceptably, and it was one because it was just so friggin' shot up to hell. It, the chamber was just a mess, and so I probably looking at that gun wouldn't want to shoot it anyway. But still, there's so many safety features built into it. It's just a great design.
It is.
Yeah. And I think everybody everybody knows we're kind of Mauser fans here, except for Aaron. It's too good. It's so good. It's boring to him.
I'm not about to argue the M95 is any kind of pinnacle of design. I'm not a moron. I like what I like, you know.
Yeah.
But
I
I'm
can
not.
respect that.
That's why, like, I love poking people that like Lee Enfields and Mosins, because I'm like, I'm sitting over here, like, in the corner going, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah. But
so I'm reading this about variants and the Kriegs model, which is what you talked about. But I'm reading this, and it's in here that Germany started the war without a standardized sniper program.
Yeah, that's not dissimilar to World War I too.
No.
It was like the Gewehr 98 snipers were like the Wild West until like 1917, and then they really started buttoning down and standardizing them. But there were a lot of Preston service scopes, and the same thing happened in World War II. There was a lot of variability, and things weren't really ratcheted down until later. And then you have
but even then, it mentions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least
like
7 or 8 known variants of scopes.
I'm like high turret, low turret, ZF, ZF4. Like I'm doing these things as he's like naming them. So you have to understand too that you're applying a little bit of modern knowledge to the past. So it was more of a designated marksman style of a thing, not in a there's two guys crawling around in ghillie suits in the woods kind of thing.
Well,
no, I understand.
Well, too, like, why would you need a sniper if you're just going to have a shitload of tanks and a bunch of infantry running behind them or riding in half tracks behind and that's how you win the battle? Why do you need a sniper if you're just going to artillery them and then run your tanks over and that's how you win? Why do you need a sniper?
And it looks like this is saying that most of the experience where they decided they needed a sniper program was in the Eastern Front. When I'm guessing it stalled and
when it bogged down,
city fighting,
warfare, and everything else.
And that trench warfare style that kind of kicked in, like 43 to 44. And the Russians kind of reminded them of why why snipers are probably good in that kind of situation.
Remember too that the German doctrine was around the machine gun, where everyone in the squad was there to support the gun. So the squad leader would tell where the gun to go. Everyone carried ammo for the machine gun, and everyone was there to protect the machine gun.
Yeah.
So the basic rifle squad did not have a sniper type program thing in it.
Yeah, until like I said, it bogged down in the 43, 44 and kind of, necessity kind of wanted them to. But with we didn't touch on the automatics, but Hitler actually put an order in place that he wanted a silenced and scoped G43 in every infantry squad to kind of act as that sniper for them.
And the 43 was just such a disappointment as a sniper. It just didn't have that level of accuracy that they needed. So it really, it had the integral scope rail and all that, but it was just not a great platform for a sniper at all.
Yeah, clamping like a little 4-power scope onto like a universal semi-auto is not. Yeah, it doesn't give you the actual sniper. Like the Germans had like kind of designated marksman kind of idea going on, and not exactly true sniper.
Right. Because that's another thing too that a lot of people, at least, and I'm civilian as well, I'm not military, but a lot of people that are in the modern world assume is that if it has a scope on it, it's a sniper rifle. And there's a lot of guns that have scopes that are not sniper rifles. They're designated marksman's rifles.
CF-41,
which are not the same level of accuracy, not the same application really. And I had a PSL, which is totally different in terms of like what we're talking about, but like it's not a sniper rifle, but because it has a big ass scope on it, everybody's like, oh, it's a sniper, and I'm like, nah. No, it's awful. It's not meant for that.
Yeah, no. It's not meant for taking precise shots at 1,000 yards. It's meant so that you could take a better shot at like a couple 100 meters, more like. Not,
right.
So
it's even known for those anyway that once they take a couple shots and the barrel heats up, it's just gone. Its accuracy is gone.
If you want to read a good book about something like this, Eastern Front Sniper: The Life of Matthias Hetzenauer. He was a sniper of the German military on the Eastern Front. He used a Mosin with a PU scope.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. The photo of him on his book cover, which I don't know if I can show you.
No, it's
Nope.
not going to show.
It's not going to show it, but it actually has a K98K with I think a low turret on it, and that's not his gun.
Yeah, that's what he poses for pictures.
That's his. They gave him that to pose with.
Yep.
Because they took his Mosin from him.
Yeah.
So
you didn't.
You can't be using the enemy's gun.
You have a Russian gun. Yeah.
So, things to keep in mind, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I do see here they did try to prototype the K98K into a paratrooper. That was ultimately a failure, is what it says.
Yep.
Folding stocks and attachable barrels. That was ultimately deemed not necessary. There's also the G40K. Yeah,
that was a really super simplified attempt to make kind of a replacement for the K98K, but it really didn't go anywhere. I think just a very small number survived. I think there was one at Aberdeen at one point that's been photographed. I think if you look in the books, it was sort of a experiment and really didn't amount to much.
Yeah.
And then the one that Danny wants is the KKW cadet rifle.
Oh yeah. I do need. Yeah, I still need a KKW.
Yeah, which is a single shot 22 caliber rifle.
Yep.
Which is designed exactly to mimic exactly how a K98K.
And it really does. It really feels just like weight and balance. Everything it feels just like a K98K. Yeah, way more so than the DSM.
DSM 34. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, it's the KKWs are nice. They have just as a trainer, they're perfect for their role.
Yeah, they're really good. That's a really interesting program. I did a video on the DSMs, and I don't know if I told you this, Chris. So when I found out I was having a boy, like my first son, when I found out I was having a boy, I'm like, I gotta get him something. So I was thinking about, and I decided on a Mauser 22, so that he could actually shoot it. So I got the DSM because I wanted something historical and everything. And a friend of mine gave me a good deal on a nice, Mauser DSM. And so I got that for him even before he was born. And every 6 months I take a picture of him like with it. So like when he's a little 6-month-old baby, it's me holding him and the rifle's kind of up against the wall. So every picture. So here in a couple of months, I'll take an updated one. But yeah, every 6 months I get him and his rifle like as he gets bigger. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, that's I'm gonna have to get another one now for the new
Yeah. The first world problems, Danny.
I know. Yeah, that's actually, it's funny because that's one of the guns my wife is like, yeah, you should buy it. You have to get another one for the youngest, That's one of those I got permission, to get. But yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, the trainer rifles is a whole nother kind of rabbit hole. But I feel like we could do another one of these on maybe carbines. And one of the things I love is German substitute standard rifles. We could really go down. Down a rabbit hole with those.
Rabbit hole
there. All the XX/40 rifles that there are, which is really weird that there's so many of those.
Well, and then you could do there. A lot of that occurred in World War I, but they're not as well known. They were converting 8mm. Mauser labels. They had German captured Enfields, Mosins. They converted Belgian 89s to 8mm. They had some of the export models like the Chinese 1907s and the Paraguayans that they bought from Mauser's inventory. They had some leftover Ottoman 87 models that they sat unsold, so they converted those to start World War One. So there's a lot of substitute standard even in World War One.
Yeah.
Substitute standard would be real fun. I would love to do that one.
Yeah, that would be a good episode. Quite the rabbit hole. This is
Big time.
Like those M95s, right, Danny?
Oh, well, they're completely different, you see, because they have a different letter at this part of it, or number.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's a completely different gun. That's Aaron's logic for collecting M95s.
Well, hey, there's nothing wrong with having a lot of one.
I definitely don't do that.
One model. Gewehr 98s happen to be a personal addiction of mine, so.
No, Danny, I tell you that the M95 Dutch is M space 95. The M95 Austro-Hungarian is M period 95. And that is the literal how it's written on the guns. Like, it's how it's stamped on there.
Yeah.
So whenever somebody goes M95 without a space and no period, I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
They changed the side rail designation a couple different times on the 88. So the earliest Steyr ones are just G period 88, and then you have the some of the Prussian arsenals were G mod 88, and then finally Gewehr 88 or GEW 88. So that kind of, there's little designations.
Oh
change
yeah. The mod designation is so interesting because I know a lot of people take what's written on the gun as like the gospel for what the gun is. But with K98Ks, it's mod 98 on the side, but nobody ever calls it a mod 98. Hey, you got your mod 98? I picked up a new mod 98. Like, nobody says that.
And the different fonts, like you can always tell which the especially with some, so kind of a misunderstood. You had Gustloff and JP Sauer as K98K makers. They weren't really manufacturers. They were assemblers. They didn't really make their own receivers. They brought in subcontracted receivers. Sauer built typically off of Walther receivers and Irma/FEMA receivers. And then you had Gustloff, who they had a lot of Astra work receivers. So they really just assembled. They didn't really manufacture them from the ground up like say Mauser. Yeah, they got the stamp. They got the stamp. They had their own code and everything, but ultimately, they weren't making their own receivers like some of the Steyr or Mauser were.
That's almost like the pedal scheme rifles from the British, where you have like a ton of manufacturers and then a single one like assembles it.
Yep.
Yeah.
They also did that with P38s. So FN made P30. I think it was P38s. They made different frames for different pistols, and people put them together.
Yeah, and Steyr, the old Radom factory fell under their auspices, and if you get a BNZ 45 that has a E77 receiver, that was a Radom. That was originally manufactured at Radom and assembled. So
yeah.
It's a dark.
I just thought of something substitute standard, Danny.
Yeah.
I thought of something that's substitute standard that would be fun to talk about that it doesn't get a lot of love.
What's that?
The MG34.
You're in my home now. You're in my home.
I'm kidding.
All right. I live there.
I'm messing with you. But the what is it? What's the Steyr submachine gun?
The MP34. The Steyr. Yeah.
So that one doesn't get a lot of love, I don't think.
Belgian.
It was great.
Portugal.
Great. Yeah. The Germans, I think, used it to a very small extent, but most of them went to like Portugal or other contracts.
It's an SSVT gun.
Yeah.
I think they're cool as shit. Mostly the stripper clip loading thing built into the like magazine well on it is, and the fact that it's like all milled, steel, and it's a sexy, yeah.
If you want to do
the Mercedes of submachine guns, I think, looking back on it.
If you want to look at early SMG uses, you want SSVT in France because they used MP28s, Irma M35s, MP34s, like because they didn't have the procurement program. So the book I have, there's one photo of an MP40, and it was a lieutenant, I think, or not a Lloyd. It'd be a I forget the name of it now. I think it's Sturmont, but he has one, and everything else is all MP28s and Irma MP35s.
It says that as a substitute standard submachine gun, it wasn't used much in the German military just because of how expensive it was to produce.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was used.
They already had by the time the German and Austria combined, they were already pretty much finalizing the design for the MP40, and it was like there was no need to continue producing the much more complicated and much more expensive version.
Yeah. If you want to see him in combat,
it's called the Rolls Royce of submachine guns.
Yeah,
because it is extremely high. The highest build quality standard possible is what they said it was built to.
Yep. If you want to see that stuff in combat, you have to look up, especially like SSVT or LAH or Totenkopf in France, and you can see them used in combat.
For one of those.
Yeah,
I have a bayonet for one of those. I have the Portuguese bayonet for it. Because a guy found it in a antique store, and he messaged me because it's an M95 bayonet, just slightly modified. It's just got a slightly different way it attaches, and that's it. It looks just like an M95 bayonet.
Yeah, not too many SMGs that take bayonets like that. No. And the Japanese
not like a full bayonet too.
The Type 100 maybe.
Yeah. It's a legit rifle bayonet too. It's not like a little stabby thing. Yeah. It's like a legit rifle bayonet too, which is ridiculous. It's longer than the barrel of the gun.
Yeah. That's like the Japanese. Yeah. Or I think the Type 100 bayonet's shorter, I think, than the Type 30 bayonet.
Yeah, well, we're getting off topic here, obviously.
That's what we do, man. That's on brand.
Substitute standard though.
Yeah, that's a good follow up. That's another rabbit hole. I mostly focus on World War II substitute standards. But World War I stuff, that's a whole other realm.
They got a designation. That got a designation, so it obviously was used somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, they were chambered in 8mm Mauser, so it's not like it was that weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the Germans, the Germans thought they were Greek, by the way.
So that's funny.
The designation is that it's from Greece.
That's really funny.
Because they captured most of them in Greece for some reason.
Yeah.
Not sure how they got there, but so they assumed it was made in Greece.
There's a picture that I'm trying to win on eBay, and it's an original photo. It's like in a lot, but one of the photos is a bunch of like German equipment and like German soldiers, and it's a bunch of Dutch M95s like in teepees, like along the row. So like it's a whole like squad or whatever of German soldiers that were all issued Dutch M95s.
Are they field gendarmerie?
Right?
What?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Rural police. Yeah.
I said, are they field gendarmerie, not rural police? It's two different things.
They had a bunch of them. It was hard to tell.
Land gendarmerie.
Field. Yes.
Yeah.
It was hard to tell, but it was earlier war, and they had M35 and a few 1917 Stahlhelms kind of mixed in. So it was like it was early. There is a photo. There's a rather famous photo from Market Garden. I'm pretty sure it's Market Garden, and it's of this German general. Like he heard that a position was taken over by the British, and he was like, "What? No, it isn't." So him and like his driver hopped in a Mercedes and took off towards the area. But the British were there, and they machine gunned the vehicle, and it killed the general. But the driver, he got out and died next to the car. But laying next to his body was a Dutch M95 that he pulled out of the car with him. And so I saw this. I have this photo somewhere, and it is just like really neat. Like he, as the driver, he picked the Dutch M95 because he could, shove it in the car. It's nice and short, handy. Sure. He can shove it in the car, and he could pull it out, and use it if he needed to. So he didn't make it very far, but that's like the latest example that I've seen. Oh, next to, I've seen a video of Volkssturm being handed out Dutch M95s, like out of a crate. Yeah. Like they open up the crate, and they're handing out Dutch M95s to a bunch of German Volkssturm. But yeah, substitute stuff is good. A lot of it's not marked, which is kind of makes it harder for collectors. Like the Germans didn't mark everything, they weren't as anal as people think they were with marking everything they ever captured ever. They didn't mark it. If they did, every Belgian and French gun just about would have markings on it, and German capture markings, and they really
From what I understand, it's only really if they went through some kind of rebuild process.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they were fixed, or if so they only really cared if they made it, or if they had to fix it, and that was the two reasons it would be marked.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and it's an easy way to tell too if a marking is a little bit spurious. You look at it, and if there was nothing that was changed about it, or something like that, it would make a lot of sense that this probably was added by someone trying to increase the value.
Be a bunch of SVT 40s and PPSH 41s.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I feel like this was a really good podcast, guys. This is I'm looking at the recording here. One. Yeah, it's getting close to 3 hours. So this was
before we end it. Can I thank my wife for getting me beers, because she is an incredible woman. I know. Like,
can you hear this? Can you hear the clapping? Okay.
Everyone's clapping for you. Let's clap. Yeah, real trooper here. She did all barely complain.
She's the real MVP.
Yeah.
Now we had a really wide field to cover, so we stayed high level, but I know we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It doesn't get a lot of love, I don't think, in terms of you see technological advancements, and people talk about how fast flight travel came into existence, and how we went from flight to jets in such a short amount of time. But the musket was the thing for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And then it suddenly was just no, gone. In a very relatively short period of time, it was completely different.
If you think where we've came from, we came from front stuffers to reliable semi-automatic with magazine interchange in a short window of time. And in that short amount of time now, we went from this is how it is to don't drink the liquid from the battery in your car.
Are you saying we're regressing?
Yes. Yes, I am. We came so far. We should be the Jetsons, but instead we're not supposed to drink the liquid from the battery.
Crazy.
You don't want to get started on the.
You need to drink your corn syrup and shut up.
Yeah.
Is it high fructose corn syrup though?
No, it's distilled.
Oh, damn.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's, all right, you want to do the sign off, Danny?
Yeah, I'll do the sign off here. Hey, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a great show. It's always nice to pick the brain of an expert, especially an expert who's not an asshole, who knows a lot about Gewehr 98s.
And I'm not an expert by any stretch. I just like talking about this stuff.
Yeah,
but you're not an asshole.
Well, I like to think I'm not anyway. I don't know. I like to think I'm a good egg.
Yeah.
No, I joke about that, but no, I think I know somebody who he actually does know a lot, but he introduced himself as an expert, and I'm immediately yeah, no. I think there's a what is that called? The Dunning-Kruger effect. The more you know, the more you think. There's a real thing. And I think it's a good sign that you say you're not, because who is of any?
Yeah, and
really?
I openly admit I'm not. There's a lot we don't know, and that's what makes collecting this stuff still fun.
Yeah.
It's not like they were used in any kind of major conflict, and like the countries dissolved and reappeared and dissolved and reappeared.
Yeah. There's very little history with German arms.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Chris. Thanks for coming on, Aaron, and welcome back, Jared. And we'll see you guys next time.